Chapter 434. You don't want to delegate? Can you? Can you? Tianxiang was besieged on all sides at that time. Jun Zhantian was injured and could no longer manage the military. Duge Zongheng was a brave man and couldn't handle the situation. The Yutang Empire sent 600,000 soldiers to invade the east. The Xinxia Empire sent 500,000 soldiers to attack the west. The Haishao Empire sent 400,000 soldiers to invade the southeast. The Northern Grasslands King sent 400,000 soldiers to invade. The Tianxiang Empire was besieged on all sides. At that time, I ordered Jun Wuhui to lead 200,000 soldiers to fight against the Yutang Empire's 600,000 soldiers and the Haishao Empire's 400,000 soldiers. Jun Wumeng and Jun Wui fought against the Northern Grasslands wolves, while Duge Wudi and Murong Fengyun sent 200,000 soldiers to fight against the Xinxia Empire's 500,000 soldiers. In this way, the Tianxiang Imperial Army was also transferred out, leaving less than 10,000 soldiers to guard the capital. At that time, I believe everyone thought that Tianxiang was finished. With such a disparity in strength, fighting on all sides was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. But who would have thought that Jun Wuhui's military skills were so superhuman? He predicted the enemy's every move, and burned Yutang for 3 months in the middle of winter. 7,000 miles of forests were burned to the ground. Even now, the largest tree in these 7,000 miles of mountains and rivers is no thicker than a man's thigh. And in these 3 months, he defeated the Haishao Empire's 400,000 soldiers and conquered 19 cities in a row. He even took all the captives under his command and increased the number of troops under his command to 800,000. In the end, he conquered the Soaring Sky Empire in one fell swoop and completely resolved the crisis in the south of Tianxiang. Then, he sent his troops straight to Yutang. His troops pressed down on the border and fought a series of battles. Step by step, he pressed forward and achieved the untarnished title of White General, Tianxiang's military god. And Jun Wumeng and Jun Wui didn't let their elder brother be the only one. They swept across the northern borders and fought against the wolves of the grasslands. From being at a disadvantage, they gradually equalized the situation. Then, they marched straight into the grasslands. I remember that back then, Jun Wui was only 19 years old. His battle robes were soaked in several layers of blood in every battle. He swept through millions of soldiers, and wherever he went, blood flowed and heads rolled. In one battle, he became the Blood General, and his murderous aura dominated the world. Jun Wumeng was cold and merciless, enforcing the law like a mountain. His strict management of the army was rarely seen since ancient times. His words were the law, his orders were strictly executed, and his actions were swift and decisive. In every battle, he slaughtered all the captives, leaving no survivors. He was known as the Iron-Blooded God of War. It is also because of him that the population of the Great Grasslands has rapidly decreased and has yet to recover to this day. They do not dare to take a step recklessly against our dynasty. The prestige of the Jun family's 4 great generals spread throughout the world from then on. Following that, the battles in the north and south never ended. The prestige of the Jun family was growing stronger and stronger. The reputation of the White General, the God of War, and the Blood General was also growing stronger and stronger. I wanted to reduce the military power in just a few years, but it had already reached an uncontrollable situation. The entire world knows about the Jun family's 4 great generals. But, not many people remember the Emperor of Tianxiang. The Jun family had already ruled over tens of thousands of miles of mountains and rivers. In fact, it wasn't just the mountains and rivers of Tianxiang, but the entire world. His Majesty the Emperor sighed as he spoke till here, heroes are created by circumstances. This is a true saying. In just a short 3.5 years, every family in the Tianxiang Empire started to worship the memorial tablets of Jun Wuhui and the others. Jun Wuhui and his 2 brothers became the living gods of war of the Xian continent. They became an immortal legend. But to me, such a legend is like 3 extremely sharp steel knives. Steel knives that are hanging over my head. The entire nation rejoiced after the crisis was averted. But, the nation's finances were also depleted, and they were struggling to move forward. But, the empire's army had reached an unprecedented period of prosperity. The empire's territory had also reached an extremely glorious level. It had looked down upon the world, and the heroes of the world didn't even dare to look at it. The 4 seas were at peace for a while, and the external troubles had been eliminated. But, the crisis in my heart had come so quickly. I believe that Tian Xiang will become the ruler of the world when the world is at peace. Perhaps it will be Jun Zhan Tian or Jun Wu Hui. But, it won't be me. And, that's because Tian Xiang may not be Tian Xiang at that time. Princess Raimu's blood was boiling as she listened. She had heard about Jun Wu Hui's military exploits from countless people. But, her imperial father was talking about his past glory from a high position. And, it had touched Princess Raimu's heart. Such a heroic man. Jun Wu Hui. However, Jun Mo Xia was the only flesh and blood of this world-shaking hero. I can understand your concerns. In fact, I can even agree with them. But, you plotted against Jun Wu Hui, Jun Wu Meng, and Jun Wu Yi. So, why did you plot against Jun Mo Yu and Jun Mo Cho as well? The Empress' voice carried a hint of understanding. But, she didn't understand. Her voice was still sharp, they were only children at that time. And, they were the descendants of Tian Xiang's greatest heroes. How could you bear to do that? How could your conscience be at peace? Jun Mo Yu and Jun Mo Cho were young. But, they were already in the embryonic form of talented commanders. After a series of battles, his reputation in the army had risen to a point where it was as bright as the sun in the sky. If such a genius commander were to find out one day that their father and uncle were killed by my scheme, what would the result be? I've already betrayed the Jun family. So, what if I betrayed them again? I'd rather betray the entire world if they were in danger. Who in the world wouldn't I betray? The emperor smiled sinisterly. Besides, there was no war in the 4 seas at that time. So, they were the only ones facing Yu Tang. Moreover, Yu Tang had been retreating in defeat. In fact, they had already sent envoys to sue for peace. I was afraid that there would be no more wars after that. So, I took advantage of the fact that their wings hadn't grown yet. And, there's one more thing. The Jun family's deaths. I was merely pushing the boat forward. The Silver Blizzard City was the one who killed them. It was the Shao family. It wasn't me. What a powerful reason. You're truly shameless. The Empress sneered, but, you're still slowly suppressing the Jun family after all that you've done. Only an old man, a cripple, and a debauchee are left of the Jun family. But, you still haven't let them go. Why is that? What powerful reason is there for you to do this? Why? You're asking me why. The emperor opened his eyes wide. He looked at her as if she was an alien. You're the one asking this question. You don't know. I really don't know. A family of meritorious officials, a family of heroes who had saved the Tian Xiang Empire, they no longer had the ability to shake your emperor's position. However, they had always been suppressed by you for so many years, and they had never stopped being suppressed by you. I really don't understand. Why is this happening? Is this the so-called heart of an emperor? You'll betray them even if they don't betray you? The Empress' eyes turned even colder. Because I'm also a human. Do you understand? The Emperor lowered his voice and roared, every time I face Jun Zhan Tian, my conscience will be uneasy and my heart will be filled with guilt. Do you understand guilt? I feel sorry for him. I'm sorry for the Jun family. So, I feel bad every time I see him. I feel like I've lost face. My conscience is uneasy. My guilt will be gone as long as they're all dead. They'll disappear from my eyes forever. Do you understand what I'm saying? I understand. You've already betrayed the June family once or twice. So, what's wrong with doing it again? I'd rather betray everyone in the world when I'm in danger. Who in the world can I not betray? You've harmed your benefactor. You've harmed the heroes of the empire. But, you've done it for the sake of your conscience. The Empress was left speechless. She kept mumbling, conscience, conscience, so, conscience is like this. Conscience can be explained like this. This is the first time I've heard of it. Are you a human? Do you have a conscience? That's really nice. She laughed coldly and said, then, why don't you continue to deal with the June family? Why are you protecting the June family now? Aren't you afraid of having a guilty conscience? Isn't it your wish to suppress the June family to the point of extinction with the help of June Moxie's incest? You must have a powerful reason for your sudden change of heart, right? It's because I can't figure out the June family's background. So, I don't dare to act rashly. Who is the peerless expert behind the June family? The Emperor frowned. His dignified face was full of confusion. Will this person intervene if I destroy the June family? The Dongfang family had thrown more than 300 heads into the imperial palace for June Wuhui. But, it was only a suspicion at that time. How can I act rashly without the Silver Blizzard City as a pretext to destroy the June family? So, you're afraid. Not because of the June family's achievements. The Empress sneered, you killed loyal subjects and slaughtered generals because you were afraid. Now, you're afraid. So, you don't dare to move. So, you can only compromise. Is that right? Compromise for the general interest. How is that compromise? The Emperor was furious. Why are my actions so unbearable in your eyes? Why can't you stand in my shoes? Why can't you look at this matter with the eyes of an emperor? Why can't you weigh the gains and losses of the entire world? The eyes of an emperor have always been very shameless. The Empress's face was cold. The Queen's face was cold. I admire your conscience very much. How thick-skinned you must be to have such a great conscience. I'm also shocked by your great talent and strategy. And, I admire your state of mind even more. How shameless can you be to maintain such a calm state of mind? I especially admire your emperor's aura. Because you've allowed me to see all the ugliness in the world. But, I'm very tired. So, I hope that you can leave, okay? I always thought that you understood me. But, I was wrong. You don't understand me at all. The Emperor said sadly, hundreds of thousands of people died when the June family was destroyed. But, millions of people died when the Tianxiang family was destroyed. The rise of a dynasty doesn't only depend on famous generals. How can the Emperor's helplessness, abandonment, and sacrifice be measured by common sense? Chapter 435. The Empress looked at the ground expressionlessly. Her face was as cold as Lenglang's. She was disheartened. You once said that I'm the person you love the most in this life. You targeted the Yi family for me. You have said that, and at any rate, I believe you have a purpose. But, the endless suppression of the June family is the result of the dark side of your heart. I'm just a woman. I can't do anything. I can't do anything. Since you dare to say such words to me today, I know that from now on, I will never have the chance to leave the imperial palace, right? The Empress quietly raised her head and looked at him calmly. The Emperor turned his face away. Otherwise, you wouldn't have said so much in front of me today. I've been going to the June family a lot more during this period of time. It's just like how your suspicions have never stopped. But, I'll only warn you of one thing. The Empress suddenly raised her head. Her eyes were sharp and cold. Yi Guhan. The Emperor's body trembled. He finally understood why the Empress had responded to him. It was because Yi Guhan was under the protection of the Jun family. I hope you won't hurt him again. He was already a complete cripple. He has nothing now. In fact, he didn't have anything for a long time. Even the Xian skills he relied on to survive. The Empress's voice was hollow. She looked at the magnificent imperial palace. Her eyes were empty and lifeless. But, he still has you. Your heart. The Emperor roared in a heart-wrenching manner. My heart has died since 18 years ago. The Empress said, I don't mind that my body is dead. Plus, I have your heart with me. The Emperor staggered back. A eunuch's report came from outside the door, Your Majesty, there's a letter from Tian Nan. Bring it in. The Emperor was silent for a long time. He supported his forehead with his hand. His face was full of defeat and frustration. After a long time, he said in a hoarse voice, Bring it in. His Majesty looked at the intelligence note that was rolled into a thin thread in his hand and slowly unfolded it. He only took a glance and his pupils suddenly contracted. Then, his eyes turned as sharp as an eagle's as he stared at the note, as if it was an irreconcilable enemy. Finally, his hand trembled, and the paper fluttered to the ground. The Emperor's two hands were still in the position of unfolding the piece of paper. His eyes were dull and unmoving. His body seemed to have been struck by lightning, and he suddenly felt dizzy. He swayed a few times and almost fell down. Then, he slowly bent down and picked up the note. He read it carefully again and sighed heavily. Then, as if he still couldn't believe it, he moved closer and read it word by word. His stalwart body swayed a few times, and his face suddenly turned deathly pale. The slip of paper was like a yellow leaf drifting in the wind. It left his hand and fell to the ground once again. But this time, he did not pick it up. The contents of the note were more or less the same as those received by the aristocratic families. However, it was much more detailed. What caught the king's attention the most were a few sentences. Jun Moxie fought Xiao Buyu alone. Xiao Buyu committed suicide out of shame and anger. I suspect that Jun Moxie's strength has already reached the level of a great master. Jun Moxie inquired about the events of that year, and Xiao Buyu coincidentally confessed to the Blood Sword Hall. Jun Wui's legs recovered, and he fought and won against Xiao Han. Jun Moxie crippled Xiao Han. One of the 8 great masters, the solitary eagle of the prairie, is currently staying with the Jun family, the great master, the Blood Sword Hall. Solitary eagle. Jun Moxie. The Emperor muttered these words in a very strange voice. The Jun family, the Emperor sighed deeply. Then, he slowly closed his eyes. There was a deep exhaustion in the corners of his eyes as he slowly said, I regret that I was too soft-hearted in the past. But, it turned out to be a disaster. His voice was somewhat hoarse and trembling. Then, he hurriedly walked out. He was about to leave when he suddenly tripped over the doorsill. He staggered violently, and nearly fell flat on his face. He was in a very sorry state. The guards stepped forward to help him up, but he had already stood up. He looked at the sky, and suddenly thought of something. Then, he turned his head, and fixed his eyes on Princess Raimu's face. Then, he disappeared. Only the mother and daughter were left in the Empress' bedroom. They looked at each other in dismay. Princess Raimu's entire body trembled. She moved 2 steps, and picked up the piece of paper from the ground. She felt that it was extremely heavy. She hated herself for listening to so many secrets today. This was undoubtedly a huge blow to Princess Raimu. In fact, it was difficult for her to bear. She had just seen a glimmer of happiness in the past few days. But, it had been shattered by the Emperor's long-winded speech. Princess Raimu suddenly felt an emptiness in her heart. She looked at her mother, and realized that her mother's eyes were exactly the same as hers. The mother and daughter looked at each other, and saw the sorrow and despair in each other's eyes. They leaned against each other. After reading the piece of paper, the Empress's face showed an expression that was hard to tell whether she was crying or smiling. She sighed weakly, and spoke with a deep sense of loneliness and melancholy. Princess Raimu was like a frightened deer. Her body trembled violently after hearing these words. Then, she powerlessly fell to the ground. Her eyes were filled with fear and despair. Because the Empress had said, "You can escape the wrath of the heavens, but you can't escape the wrath of your own. It has come so fast." Heaven's Law, and Retribution. Jun Moxie. Jun Wui. Tian Xiang, is finished. Jun Moxie and Jun Dashao, who had been in the limelight in the eyes of others, had not been peaceful all this time. It could even be said that his journey had been filled with trepidation. His eyes were filled with thorns, scars, and vicissitudes of life. This was because there were too many strange things that accompanied the young master. It could even be said that there was a peerless expert that was specifically targeting him, carrying out endless and continuous pranks on him. It made Jun Dashao very annoyed. It was impossible to guard against it. There was nowhere for him to hide. For example, when he was riding a horse with a large group of people, a flock of crows suddenly flew across the sky. Then, the crows suddenly had diarrhea. Wasn't that ridiculous? That wasn't all, because everyone was fine. The crow's excretion was accurate. Only young Master Jun and his horse were completely drenched. No normal person would have thought that a flock of crows flying in the sky would have diarrhea. Jun Dashao was also a normal person. So, he didn't think of it. So, he was at a disadvantage. The smell was so stinky that it made people want to vomit. So, what about Dashao, who had become the poop? There was another time when he was eating with the soldiers in a circle. He was eating happily when he had eaten more than half of the rice. But, a cockroach crawled out from the bottom of the bowl. It was actually alive. If the above examples had only happened once, it would have been strange and outrageous. But, it could still be explained as coincidence. But, if it happened a second time, a third time, or even a fourth time, it couldn't be explained as coincidence anymore. Moreover, it wasn't over yet. The poop definitely had to take a bath. It was not easy to clean up, but when it came to the shore, he found that the clean clothes he had prepared were gone. He searched for it for a long time with his butt naked. Then, he was hit by mud from nowhere. He had to go back to the river to take another bath. The timing of these strange accidents was extremely ingenious. They almost didn't give the people involved a chance to react. Even with Jun Moxie and Jun Dashao's superhuman reflexes, they could only dodge a small part of it. Most of the time, they were still at the mercy of others. Young Master Jun was truly speechless. It was a flat road, and it was fine for thousands of soldiers to walk over it. But when he walked over it, he and his horse fell into the pit with a loud bang. Even if this was a prank, this was too much. What kind of strength did one have to be able to create such a trap in such a short time? When he slept at night, it was fine if he didn't sleep in a tent. But, as long as he slept in a tent, Dashao, who was used to sleeping in a level 1 sleep, would definitely find a few colorful snakes wrapped in his clothes when he woke up in the morning. To be honest, if it wasn't for the protection of the Hongjun Pagoda and the Yin-Yang escape, Dashao's days would really be hard to pass. However, Jun Moxie's countermeasures and reactions were seen by the people who set up the trap. They were also impressed. If an ordinary person encountered this kind of thing, they would have already had a mental breakdown. But, Jun Moxie and Jun Dashao were still so lively. His face didn't even change. He went to wash when he was dirty. After washing, he didn't even look for clothes. He just disappeared with his butt naked. Moreover, no one knew how he disappeared. They scratched their heads and stared at him in bewilderment. Every morning, he didn't eat rice, nor did he eat the big pot of vegetables. Instead, he just roasted snake meat. Moreover, he ate it with relish. Even the group of soldiers also ate their fill. It would be a pity to waste such a fat snake. Qian Sun Serpent Queen saw this. She gritted her teeth. If there were crows and other birds flying overhead, Jun Moxie would shoot them down from afar. Then, he would ignore those that were not tasty. Naturally, if there were delicious ones, he would have a meal of wild game. If there were any traps on the road, he would still fall into them. But, only the horse would go down, not the man. In short, during the fight, Jun Dashao seemed to be at a disadvantage. But, he could often fill his stomach with food. So, they continued to walk like this. The person who set up the trap was also ruthless. How can a person's psychological quality be so good? How can his guard be so strong? He must be tired to death, right? But, Jun Moxie's previous life was spent in the worst environment. There were even more dangerous experiences than what he was going through now. Not to mention, what he was going through now was just a prank. It was definitely not life-threatening. Naturally, it was not comparable to the near-death experience in his previous life. Even after every fight, Da Xiao could actually feel a sense of familiarity that he hadn't felt for a long time. It was really relaxing and happy. This made the white-clothed girl, Mei Shuyan, and the Qian Sun Serpent Queen look at each other helplessly. They really couldn't believe that there was such a freak in the world. If they were played like this by someone else, they would have found a tree and killed themselves. Chapter 436. Jun Moxie had finally settled most of the Xiao family's matters, and the anger that had been accumulating in his heart for a long time had also been vented. However, the demonic charm on his body had unknowingly thickened as he continued to slaughter. Right now, every movement of his had a kind of demonic charm to it. Coupled with his calm eyes, it seemed extremely contradictory. But this kind of contradiction had instead added an indescribable demonic charm to him. That was the unique charm of the previous evil monarch, looking askance at the world, looking disdainfully at all living beings. White is also an eye. Green is also an eye. Dugu Xiaoyi looked at Jun Moxie's eyes, becoming more and more blurred, especially in the recent period after the battle with the Xiao family. Jun Moxie rarely went to the women's territory, often disappearing without a shadow. Although Guan Qinghan was still able to keep her composure, Dugu Xiaoyi really couldn't bear it, often running around looking for Da Xiao. Of course, her efforts didn't have the slightest effect. Because during this period of time, Jun Moxie really came and went like a ghost, rarely staying outside. Most of the time he stayed in the Hongjun Pagoda, wholeheartedly cultivating, improving his own cultivation. Fist is the hard truth, especially in this world. Of the 9 swords that had been refined previously, Jun Moxie originally wanted to use one of them to replace the sword in Jun Wui's hand, but Jun Wui refused. He insisted on using the sword that had been used in the decisive battle. Speaking of which, to the current Jun Wui, the weight of that sword was very suitable, and the most important reason was that Jun Wui used this sword to defeat Xiao Han. This sword washed away Jun Wui's lifelong shame. Even if it was just a piece of scrap iron, Jun Wui still treated it as a treasure, not to mention that the sword was originally a divine weapon refined by Jun Moxie through the power of gold. Although the quality was still not as good as the 9 swords refined by Jun Moxie, in the eyes of the mortal world, it was absolutely a rare divine weapon in the world. This feeling, Jun Moxie completely understood, so he didn't force it. In addition to paying attention to the quality of the sword, swords must also pay attention to the coordination. Only the most suitable sword, can reach the ultimate realm of man and sword. Not only Jun Wui, but Da Xiao himself was also the same. During this period, besides cultivating, he held the divine sword Yellow Flame Blood to nourish the sword. A man has a soul, and a sword has a spirit. Only by having a deep level of communication with one's own sword, can one become more and more proficient. Jun Moxie didn't know anything about the spirit of the sword or the soul of the sword, but he firmly believed that a divine sword that had killed countless people, a divine weapon that could cut through iron like mud, must have its own spirit. Perhaps it was just the psychological feeling of a swordsman, but if a swordsman didn't have feelings for his own sword, then even if it was made of ordinary iron, he wouldn't be worthy to own it. He used the power of gold to refine the yellow flame blood over and over again, and used his own mind to feel, to understand, to understand. The sword, only the sword, is the only companion that will never betray me. People will change, people will betray, but the sword will not, never. It will only accompany its master forever, until the sword breaks and the person dies. In fact, the closer he got to Tianxiang City, the more strange Jun Moxie felt, as if the sword was actually trembling slightly because of excitement. This was a kind of cruelty that faintly smelled blood. The excitement of thirsting for slaughter. This kind of faint killing intent caused the murderous aura on Jun Moxie's body to move, and become more and more concentrated. So much so that Da Xiao's face became more and more silent, his eyes became more and more demonic, and his heart beat more and more intensely. The carriage went around a small hill. Jun Wui and Jun Moxie simultaneously gazed at this hill. Coincidentally, it was that small hill. That night, Jun Moxie had slaughtered the Blood Sword Hall in this very place. The looting crossbow. Only now did they realize that the slaughter that night was not unjust. The Blood Sword Hall was the Jun family's archenemy. They deserved to die. The road ahead was exceptionally spacious, and the lofty walls of Tianxiang City could be faintly seen. Jun Mo Xia squinted his eyes, and two sharp rays of light flashed in his eyes. It was as if a slumbering god of death had suddenly opened his eyes, and opened his malevolent mouth. The murderous aura on his body rose with a rumbling sound, and his aura surged like a raging tide. The god of death opens his eyes, the king of hell stares, and the evil monarch looks. The journey was long, but we've finally arrived. I want to see how many people in Tianxiang City dare to speak carelessly. The divine sword, Blood of Yellow Flame, was guided by Jun Moxie's aura, and without any prior warning, it bounced out of its scabbard by half a foot. The sword's light was as clear as water, and glistened under the illumination of the sun. It was very eye-catching. It was as if the resplendent clouds had suddenly descended upon the world. It was as if the ruler of the universe had suddenly opened his eyes, and his murderous aura could be felt. In the face of the coming turbulence, he looked down on the common people, and looked down upon the world. He was ready to slaughter without mercy, and madly sweep. At this moment, the murderous aura pierced through Tianxiang City. All the soldiers around Jun Moxie suddenly felt an abnormally huge and terrifying aura suddenly attacking them. By the time they realized what was happening, they had unknowingly left Jun Moxie's side, and the surrounding 10 feet around them had become an empty space. Even these soldiers and iron-blooded men, at this moment, found it difficult to resist the sharp murderous aura of the evil monarch. At this moment, the unfathomable Mei Shuiyan also opened her eyes in astonishment. She looked at the man and the sword, and frowned slightly. Others might not think too much about it, but in the eyes of a peerless expert like her, she could clearly feel that the man and the sword in front of her had their own imposing manner, and each had their own prestige. One man and one sword had unexpectedly become her two great enemies, and could pose a considerable threat to her. How could this be? At best, that is only a sword. No matter how special the material is, or how sharp it is still an inanimate object. Why is it giving me such a strange feeling? In fact, that sword is even more dangerous than Jun Moxie's. 30 miles away from Tianxiang City, the army had set up camp. This was the usual practice. When the general who led the troops outside returned to the capital, the army must not enter the city at the same time. Only after receiving the order, the general who led the troops would enter the city first, and then the army would return to their original encampment. Jun Moxie rode forward, and arrived at the front of the army. With a cha sound, the metal flagpole on the carriage next to him suddenly issued a strange sound, and the big flag fluttered down. Then, with a whoosh sound, the flagpole seemed to have grown by more than half out of thin air. It was as if a sharp sword had pierced the sky. This kind of strange and unusual thing naturally made everyone who saw it dumbfounded. But under the oppressive aura of Jun Moxie's body, no one dared to ask why. At this moment, Jun Moxie was like a volcano that had been silent for thousands of years, and was about to erupt. Suddenly, a horn sounded from the Tianxiang city's side, and the drawbridge was slowly lowered. Then, a group of people galloped out on their horses, and welcomed them with thunderous hooves. At the same time, two huge banners suddenly hung down from the top of the Tianxiang city's city walls, one on the left, and one on the right. The one on the left read, Divine Blood-Robed Might. The one on the right read, Triumphant Return from Tiannan City. Following behind that group of people, another orderly team slowly came out. This was the official ceremony to welcome the return of the hero. The first group of people who had rushed out were getting closer and closer, and the sound of their hooves was like thunder. Their speed didn't slow down, and instead seemed to be getting faster and faster. Great General Jun Wui couldn't help but laugh as he saw this. It's been a long time, Dugu Wudi. Jun Wui's trip to the Southern Heaven region this time was a suicidal one. Now that he had returned safe and sound and was able to see his old friend again, he was very happy. With a satisfied smile on his face, he was about to welcome them when he suddenly realized that something was wrong. He couldn't help but be startled and reined in his horse. The newcomer was none other than General Dugu Wudi of the Dugu family, with his 2 sons and 2 nephews. As he galloped on his horse, he got closer and closer. General Dugu's hedgehog-like beard grew even more curly, and his eyes were as round as copper bells, as if they were about to spit fire. Before he arrived, and before his horse had even stopped, he let out a thunderous roar. Dugu Cheng, Dugu Shang, Dugu Qian, you 3 little bastards, hurry up and get out here. A thunderous roar resounded. Also, Dugu Xiaoyi, you bastard girl, get your ass out here as well. Arg! You're infuriating me to death. It was clear that General Dugu was very angry. In fact, he was unable to restrain his anger. The 7 brothers of the Dugu family had followed Jun Wui on his expedition to the south, Dugu Cheng, Dugu Shang, and Dugu Qian. Dugu Wudi's loud roar had nearly scared the souls out of these 3 men's bodies. The 3 brothers' wishful thinking had been very good. After all, they had entered the city and handed over the order. Then, they would immediately rush out of the city and rush to the western frontier. They would seek refuge with their father, and their uncle. In any case, they wouldn't be able to return home. They would certainly be skinned alive if they returned home. However, they hadn't expected that Dugu Wudi would come here to capture them. This was too urgent. The 3 men looked at each other in dismay. They trembled as they saw the fear in each other's eyes. After dilly-dallying for a long time, seeing that he really couldn't avoid it, he walked out dejectedly. He was like a defeated soldier who had lost a battle, and his entire body was filled with a kind of miserable feeling that he was at the mercy of others. I'll kill you 3 bastards. Dugu Wudi glared at them. He panted heavily as he raised his horsewhip. I told you to look after your younger sister. Where is she? Huh? The 3 of you are like bears, and you want to go to the battlefield? Damn it. You can't even eat hot shit. You still have the nerve to live. Why don't you go and die? How could our Dugu family produce such good-for-nothings like you? Without further ado, the whip cracked. The 3 burly men did not move at all. They even secretly winked at each other and made faces at each other. Chapter 437. Dugu Wudi opened his eyes, and was dumbstruck. His fingers trembled. You. He stammered for a long time, but couldn't say even half a word. Then, he suddenly fell from his horse with a plop sound, and fell sprawling on his back. He was in an extremely sorry state. But, he still straightened his neck, and stared at his daughter with eyes full of disbelief. On the other side, Jun Mo Xia was also shocked when he saw this. His eyeballs suddenly bulged out. What's going on? What's going on? The eyes of Dugu Chung, Dugu Shang, and Dugu Qian had nearly popped out of their sockets. They saw Dugu Xiaoyi holding her belly with her hands, and walking slowly and cautiously. Her figure was abnormally bloated, and she looked like a pregnant woman who was about to give birth. She was walking with great difficulty. One wouldn't even be able to see the tips of one's toes if one were to look down from above. This girl was so slender yesterday that a gust of wind could blow her away. So, how come her belly is so big today? This speed is too outrageous. Even a pregnant woman who is about to give birth after 10 months of pregnancy may not have such a big belly. Let alone the fact that we didn't do it. Even if we did, and hit the ground like an arrow, it still wouldn't be this fast, right? This little girl is too valiant. June Moxie didn't know whether to laugh or cry for a moment. This little girl has finally used this trick. June Moxie found it funny, but he also felt somewhat moved. This little girl is undoubtedly making trouble. But, it shows that she is wholeheartedly in love with me. She loves me so much that she doesn't care about anything else. She doesn't care about anything. I like June Moxie, and I want to marry June Moxie. Just this method of doing things was very similar to the eldest young master's character. The eldest young master was a person who did things his own way. He never cared about what other people thought or said about him. On the other hand, the little lass disregarded everything else for the sake of the person she loved the most. Even though the two of them weren't exactly the same, there were similarities. One could imagine what the little girl was going to endure if she had to come out in front of the Tianxiang city's army. As a descendant of a great family and the only girl in the third generation of the Dugu family, how important was her reputation? The little girl was not stupid, and it was not that she had not thought of the consequences, but she still resolutely did it. Although it was a little ridiculous, but it showed that he was determined to bear the attack of the rumors and public opinion of Tianxiang. This ridiculous action was tantamount to saying to June Moxie, no matter what you suffer, I will be with you. You will not be lonely, you will definitely not be lonely. Because you still have me. The corners of June Moxie's cold and callous lips suddenly turned gentle. His heartstrings had been tugged at by this silly and naive little girl, Dugu Xiaoyi. Such deep love for such a little girl. What else can you do to her? Xiaoyi, you. I'm a sinner. What the fuck is this? Dugu Wudi banged his head on the ground with a bang-bang sound. He was a dignified great general of a country, but tears were flowing down his face. He called out to the heavens, but there was no response. Father, don't be like this. Dugu Xiaoyi suddenly became anxious. She had forgotten that she was pregnant, and started to run towards her father. The little girl's cultivation wasn't bad. So, she would naturally be able to cover these 2 steps in the blink of an eye. Stop. You, don't move. Oh my, you silly girl, you're courting death. Dugu Wudi turned pale with fright. He jumped up, and didn't care about his grief. He spread out his hands, and nervously said, Don't mess with the baby. Ah. Dugu Xiaoyi suddenly realized that this was a special period for her. So, she couldn't run and jump around recklessly. She stopped running, and carefully held her belly with both hands for fear that she might fall. She leaned back, and swayed like a penguin as she walked over. Then, she said in a sweet voice, Father, don't be angry. This daughter is unfilial. But I'm going to be a mother, and you're going to be a grandfather. You should be happy, you shouldn't be angry. I'm not angry. I should be happy. Huff. Dugu Wudi panted heavily. He was so angry that his eyes had turned blue. He anxiously hammered his chest, and suppressed the anger that was on the verge of erupting. Then, he pointed his finger at his daughter's belly. His voice was somewhat fierce, but there was also a trace of excitement in it. Whose? Great General Dugu was the father of several children. Moreover, he was used to seeing pregnant women. So, he shouldn't have been so ignorant. The little girl had only been away from home for a few months. So, it was impossible for her to have such a big body. However, the great general had been preoccupied with the idea that his daughter had been taken by someone else. What? Whose? Dugu Xiaoyi was stunned. Her big eyes opened wide as she asked. Dugu Wudi almost vomited blood. He trembled as he looked at Dugu Xiaoyi. Then, he roared, I'm asking who's the baby inside. Inside where? Oh, this. Dugu Xiaoyi shyly lowered her head and said in a low voice, who else could it be apart from elder brother Mo Xie? Huff, huff, huff. Dugu Wudi gasped for breath. He had been prepared for this. But, he still felt as if his precious daughter had suddenly appeared in front of him with such a big belly. So, he suddenly clenched his teeth, and roared towards the sky, Jun Mo Xie. I will castrate you. Jun Mo Xie shivered in the middle of the team. What? Castrate me? For what reason? Your daughter drugged me, and made me hover between life and death. But, you still want to castrate me? Is there any justice in this world? Father, what are you saying? Dugu Xiaoyi stamped her little feet. Her face was red as she covered her ears with her hands. The little girl didn't know much about the matters between men and women. But, she was very clear about the meaning of castration. So, she was naturally very dissatisfied. Don't stamp your feet, don't stamp your feet. Dugu Wudi anxiously jumped up and scratched his head, oh my little lady, you have two bodies now. So, you can't make big movements. Be careful, the imperial envoy finally rushed over with the imperial edict in his hand. He waved his horsetail whisk at Jun Wui, the imperial edict has arrived. Commander Jun Wui, receive the imperial edict. Receive your grandmother's mouth. Dugu Wudi flew into a rage. However, he had nowhere to vent his anger. So, he suddenly heard the eunuch's strange tone. Great General Dugu couldn't clearly hear what the eunuch was shouting. So, he suddenly erupted like a volcano. He stepped forward and kicked the eunuch who was rolling on the ground, Fu *K your grandmother's thighs. Can't you see that I'm busy? You're shouting at the top of your lungs with yellow smoke coming out of your mouth. Shout! You're shouting your mother's hair. The old eunuch rolled out while muttering gibberish, and directly somersaulted a dozen times in a row. Only then did he fall to the ground like a dried salted fish, and immediately fell unconscious. The imperial edict in his hand had already slipped out. And, it had coincidentally fallen into a puddle of water with a plop. That puddle of water didn't care whether it was an imperial edict or not. And, the words on it suddenly became blurred, and turned into a black halo. Everyone's eyeballs started to jump around. No one had ever seen anyone dare to beat an imperial envoy in such a manner since ancient times. Moreover, this imperial envoy had come to announce the reward. Moreover, Great General Dugu's curses had been extremely fluent. In fact, everyone had to twist their brains several times to understand what he was cursing at, and, this imperial envoy was out of luck. He clearly understood that the reward for Jun Wui wasn't light. He had thought that Commander Jun Wui would reward him with a large sum of money. He had dreamt of getting rich. But, he hadn't expected that he would be kicked in the face. And, he had ended up unconscious. In fact, he didn't even know which deity he had offended. Jun Wui looked at the imperial envoy. He tidied up his clothes, and was about to step forward to receive the imperial edict. But, he saw the imperial envoy roll away in front of his eyes like a rubber ball. So, he swallowed back the words your subject, Jun Wui, receives the imperial edict. He stared blankly at Dugu Wudi for a long time. Then, he sighed and said, Brother Dugu, you've caused a big disaster this time. I've caused a big disaster. Jun Wui, you're not a good person either. Dugu Wudi didn't pay attention to what Jun Wui had said. He glared angrily and shouted, "You've allowed your nephew to commit murder. You've committed a heinous crime. You and I can't exist under the same sky. Where's that little bastard Jun Moxie? Quickly get out here. I'll punch him to death if he doesn't come out on his own." The sound of a horse's hooves was heard. Jun Dashao came out from the crowd. His lips were red, his teeth were white, his facial features were delicate, and his face was handsome. His demeanor was elegant, and his style was dazzling. He looked like a jade tree in the wind, and a golden boy. "Jun Moxie. You little bastard. Ah 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 ah." Dugu Wudi pounced on him with bloodshot eyes. It seemed as if he wanted to eat someone. Jun Moxie rushed up the flagpole with a whooshing sound. He had just doubled the height of the flagpole. He reached the top of the flagpole in a few swishes. Then, he shouted, "What are you doing? This matter has nothing to do with me from the beginning to the end. You must investigate this thoroughly before you speak. You must find a good target if you want to act crazy." The flagpole was too high. Great General Dugu Wudi's martial arts were pretty good. But, he couldn't jump that high. His sturdy body wasn't very agile if he tried to climb it. So, he could only jump randomly under the flagpole. He became even more furious when he heard Jun Moxie's words. His anger soared like a bull. "What? It has nothing to do with you. Whose business is it? Fu *k. Let me get this straight. My daughter, is already in this state. And, you want to eat clean and not admit it? What am I supposed to get?" Chapter 438. Great General Dugu was angry, but he still had some sense of propriety. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been difficult for him to forcibly break the flagpole with his innate divine strength. Dugu Wudi's words were fierce, but he had no choice but to acknowledge his daughter's lifelong happiness. So, he had no choice but to admit it. "Father." Dugu Xiaoli wiped her tears and jumped up high. How can you be like this, your daughter? I won't have the face to see anyone if you continue to cause trouble like this. I don't want to live anymore, boo-hoo." Dugu Wudi jumped up in fright, and hastily let go of the flagpole. His face was aggrieved and nervous. Good Xiao-yi, don't move, don't hurt my dear grandson. You don't know how angry you are right now." Dugu Xiaoyi's face turned red. She twisted her waist and angrily said, "You still haven't let him down, he's so high, what if he falls and breaks?" Dugu Wudi rolled his eyes. This brat's cultivation is at least at Xinxian's level. How could he possibly fall and break? He hatefully said, "It's good that he's broken. You come home with me first." The great general also knew what was good and what was bad. He thought, considering the Jun family's little thief's current strength, even the Dugu family wouldn't be able to shake him. This is a man who could fight for Xinxians by himself. He has climbed to the top of the flagpole, and hasn't gone against me. This is giving me enough face. My daughter is pregnant with his flesh and blood. But, I can't provoke her. I'll go home first. But, Dugu Wudi had a headache when he thought of the storm he would have to face once he returned home. His mind was racing, and he rolled his eyes. Then, he pointed his horsewhip. "Hurry up and bring that palanquin over. Hurry up." This palanquin belonged to the imperial envoy who had come to announce the imperial edict. And, Dugu Wudi had brought it over as a matter of course. Jun Moxie took advantage of this time to slip down from the flagpole. He wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. The Dugu family was full of troublemakers. They were really too tough. However, he couldn't make things difficult for Dugu Xiaoyi for the sake of Dugu Wudi. Dugu Xiaoyi had already done everything she could. Was he, a man, supposed to dawdle and pretend to be reserved? Now that things had come to this, he had to marry her, even if he didn't want to. Otherwise, the Jun family and the Dugu family would completely break off their relationship. In fact, the Dugu family wouldn't be able to solve this problem for generations to come. It had to be said that although the little lass had put a lot of thought into this move, it was also extremely cruel. As a result, the two great families had no way out and no way to mediate. Even if she went home and found out that the pregnancy was fake, after doing it in front of so many people, the fake was real. This time, the little lass had made up her mind. Even June Moxie had made up his mind. Damn it, wasn't it just marrying another wife? Don't tell me that I don't have the capital. The little lass was still young, but she was a beauty. Moreover, she was passionately devoted to me. So, I wouldn't suffer a loss no matter what. Damn it, I'll just raise her up. June Moxie fiercely snorted twice. He looked at Dugu Xiaoyi's belly with malicious intentions. He didn't know what it was being propped up by. He secretly swore in his heart, Big Brother will make her bulge up one day. What are you guys doing here? Dugu Wudi turned his head, and realized that the people carrying the palanquin were dressed like people from the imperial palace. He opened his eyes wide, and then realized, oh, you're here to issue an imperial edict, right? Hurry up. This general is using a palanquin. You don't mind, right? Everyone looked at each other in dismay. Black lines appeared on their foreheads. The eunuch who issued the imperial edict had been knocked unconscious by you. And now, you're doing this again, ah. General Dugu finally understood what had happened after the explanation. He ran over, and bent down to look at the unconscious old eunuch. He couldn't help but frown bitterly. This guy can't bear to push and pull, this general only casually pushed him. How did he become like this? What should we do? Everyone was left speechless. You're the one who caused this trouble. How can you ask someone else? Can't bear to push and pull, how many people in the Tianxiang Empire can withstand your push? Forget it, I don't care. Third brother June, you go back and ask His Majesty about the reward. Then, you take the reward home. I reckon that the reward will be a lot. Remember to invite me for a drink later. We'll drink your family's special wine. It's the kind that costs 10,000 gold. As for my side, I'll go back and look for my old man to settle this matter. You should also help your old man to say a few words to me. Don't let me get beaten. Well, that's all. I'll go first. Dugu Wudi casually said this. Then, he invited his daughter into the palanquin as if he was serving his great-grandmother. Then, he cracked his horsewhip, and fiercely glared at June Moxie, I'll look for you to settle accounts later. Don't forget to bring me a few jars of wine when you get home. You motherfew asterisk cur. You don't know how to read the situation. Go. He clamped his legs, and the horse neighed as it galloped away like the wind. He's calling himself my father-in-law now. The rest of the people looked at each other in dismay. After all, everyone was familiar with this guy's conduct. So, they didn't find it strange at all. So, they sighed and waved their hands. Then, they walked towards the city gate. They hadn't even reached the city gate when they suddenly heard a commotion from inside. Then, a group of people dressed like Confucian scholars rushed out one after another. Their faces were full of disdain, and their eyes were full of disdain. They were led by several people who had been fiercely insulted by June Moxie at the Scholarly Autumn Festival. June Moxie's pupils contracted. His complexion sank, and his murderous intention soared. He looked at his side, and saw that there were less than 100 people around him. There were only the young masters of the various families and their guards besides himself and Jun Wui. There were also the carriages of Guan Qinghan, Mei Shuyan, and Mei Qianqian. The people of the Dugu family had already entered the city with Dugu Wudi. The young masters were now looking at Jun Dashao with gloating eyes. You may be awe-inspiring, but you may not be able to stop the mouths of the people. Let's see how you die this time, Jun Moxie. Ha ha ha. June Moxie. A despicable person like you still has the face to return to Tianxiang City? The one who had spoken was tall and elegant. He had an indignant expression on his face. He was an acquaintance from the scholarly autumn festival, scholar Han Jidong. Jun Moxie had intentionally or unintentionally disrupted the scholarly autumn festival. He had humiliated the scholars of the Wenxing Heavenly Literature Institute. And, because of Jun Moxie, these scholars had lost the opportunity to leap into the Dragon's Gate. In fact, not a single one of them had obtained the opportunity to become an official in the imperial court. This was tantamount to Jun Moxie blocking their way to the top. It seemed that such a good thing wouldn't happen again in the future. How could these scholars, who had dreamed of high positions and generous salaries, endure this? What was the point of studying so hard for 10 years? What was the point of studying so hard at a young age? What was the point of learning martial arts and literature? However, Jun Moxie had allowed this batch of goods to rot in his hands. In fact, he hadn't been able to sell them. This was a heinous crime. Heinous beyond redemption. Jun Moxie had created a rare scandal at this time. So, how could the other scholars not throw stones at him when he was down? They wanted Jun Moxie to pay the heaviest price. Even if you, Jun Moxie, are thick-skinned enough to endure it, I don't believe that your sister-in-law is as thick-skinned. I'll curse you to death. Even if I can't curse you to death, the people's saliva will drown you to death. Therefore, the scholars tried their best to incite those who knew the truth and those who didn't. Everyone swarmed to the city gates. You want to enter the city? Fine. Enter through our spittle. I heard that Jun Moxie's sister-in-law is also in the group. This time, she'll be embarrassed to death. It could be said that the scholars' plan was very vicious. That's why they say, loyal people are dogs, and unfaithful people are scholars. These scholars were even more despicable than hooligans. Hooligans aren't scary. What's scary is that hooligans are cultured. That was the logic. Dugu Wudi saw it when he went in, but he was determined to make Jun Moxie suffer a little. Therefore, he didn't care. Besides, his daughter was pregnant now. If she caused any trouble and affected the fetus, he wouldn't be able to bear the responsibility. After all, the old men of the two families were eagerly waiting for their great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren, therefore, General Dugu pretended not to see them and slipped away. I still have the face to come back. Why would I not have the face to come back? Of course I have the face to come back. I won the battle, so I have the face to come back. Why? Do you have any objections? Jun Moxie calmly stopped Jun Wui from interfering. Since these people dared to gather here, it meant that they weren't afraid of the blood general, Jun Wui. There must be someone else behind this. Jun Wui might not be able to do anything if he interfered. In fact, the curses would only get louder and louder. In fact, it would turn into an ocean that would drown everyone. At such a time, he could only use extreme methods and extreme bloodshed to suppress it. So that no one in this 1,000-year-old city would dare to cough. Only then would he be able to suppress it forever. Rumors? Jun Moxie smiled grimly in his heart. I really don't understand. Could rumors be more threatening than knives? What do you mean by being condemned by the masses? In my opinion, being forced to death by rumors is a coward. In my hands, I will kill so many people that no one dares to speak against rumors. Whoever dares to speak will die. Let's see how many people aren't afraid of death. At most, I will slaughter everyone in the world. Jun Moxie, you are truly shameless. You even dare to boast like this. You are filthy, immoral, unscrupulous, and shameless. You are an adulterer, and everyone has the right to punish you. These words were spoken in an unusually sharp and indifferent manner. It was hard to hear. Guan Qinghan could hear it clearly from inside the carriage. She couldn't help but turn pale even though she was mentally prepared. Guan Qinghan couldn't help but feel despair and sorrow in her eyes as she listened to the earth-shaking curses outside. Chapter 439. The corners of Mei Shuyan's mouth twitched. She didn't know why she had suddenly become so angry. In fact, she wanted to get out of the carriage and trample these ants into meat paste. What are these people? They can disappear with a puff of air. And they dare to clamor in front of the powerhouses of the present age? Could it be that I don't understand the world? The one who had spoken this sentence was another gifted scholar. He had also shown his face at the gifted scholars' banquet, Qin Qiu Shi. His face was filled with awe-inspiring righteousness, and he had the air of a righteous protector. Ah, I remember you. You're called Qin Qiu Shi, right? Ah, diligent begging for shit, that's the name your father gave you. Of course, I don't understand the meaning behind it. In fact, I don't know whether it's to make you diligent begging for shit or to become an official. Jun Moxie smiled as he looked at him. His eyes were as cold as ice. I only want to ask you. You've listed these crimes against me. But, where did they come from? On what basis? Where did they come from? On what basis? Jun Moxie, you're still pretending to be ignorant even at this moment. The dirty things you and your sister-in-law have done, the shameless shady business. Do you think you can hide it from the world? You adulterers and adulterers live together. Why are you pretending to be innocent? Even if you are the grandson of a duke, a direct descendant of a noble family, you cannot hide the true nature of your licentious and shameless nature. Qin Qiu Shi was so angry that his face turned ashen, pointing his finger and cursing. Ah, you're filled with righteous indignation. Very good. Is there anything else you want to add? Jun Moxie picked his ears. Jun Moxie, don't tell me that Brother Qin's words aren't enough to make you feel ashamed? Another gifted scholar stood up and looked at Jun Moxie with resentment. You're the son of a high-ranking official, and the descendant of a duke. You've been living a life of luxury, glory, splendor, and wealth. You've been blessed by the emperor. It can be said that you're already standing at the peak of Tianxiang. But, you've done such shameless things. Are you trying to ruin the customs of my Tianxiang? Do you know that because of you, our Tianxiang Empire has become the laughingstock of the surrounding countries? If you had even the slightest bit of conscience, you would have killed yourself out of shame. And now, you've appeared in front of the Tianxiang city's gates in broad daylight. And, you've even put on an innocent face. You're truly shameless. Jun Moxie, how can you be so shameless? This scholar's name was Yan Feng, and he was also an acquaintance. Jun Moxie finally saw it. It seems like the Wenxing Heavenly Institute wants to fight to the death with me. Since that's the case, I'll give you another painful lesson. Encouraged by these words, the huge crowd behind them started to shout, adulterers and adulterers, they deserve to die. Hurry up and die. So I have committed such a heinous crime? Jun Moxie giggled and asked Yan Feng, even if I'm shameless, what does this have to do with you? Why did you stand out? Rebels and traitors, adulterers and prostitutes, everyone has the right to punish them. Why can't I stand out? I may not be as strong as you, and I may not be as strong as you. But, our Wenxing Heavenly Institute still has an awe-inspiring righteousness. It's enough to make an evil thief like you feel ashamed and unable to show his face. Return peace to the world. Yan Feng shouted loudly, and his face was full of righteousness. Well said. We may not have anything, but we still have an awe-inspiring righteousness. We must return peace to the world. The group of scholars cheered loudly. Everyone's faces had turned red with excitement. Jun Moxie looked at the increasingly heated atmosphere in front of him with pity. He could only feel an extremely tyrannical aura rising in his heart, filling his heart. Awe-inspiring righteousness, ha ha ha. Jun Moxie suddenly burst into laughter, what a good, awe-inspiring righteousness. Your so-called awe-inspiring righteousness is to place yourself at the highest point of morality, and then criticize others for their mistakes, right? Your so-called awe-inspiring righteousness is used to control other people's feelings. Your marriage under the awe-inspiring righteousness is based on the words of the parents and the words of the matchmaker. Your awe-inspiring righteousness is trying to force an innocent girl into a dead end. Hearing the words innocent girl, Han Ji Dong, Qin Qiu Shi, Yan Feng, and the other scholars' eyes finally flashed with a trace of panic and guilt. In Jun Moxie's eyes, he understood that these people knew the inside story. They clearly knew that Guan Qing Han was innocent and had only been caught in the crossfire. But they still came to stir up trouble. Jun Moxie's murderous intent surged once again. I know your true purpose. You only came because I ruined the Golden Scholarly Scholar Feast and blocked your path to promotion. So, you want to take revenge now. Hee, I'm right, right? Jun Moxie's eyes were ice cold. So what? Jun Moxie, speaking of this matter, you are guilty of the most heinous crimes. The scholars didn't feel ashamed when their true thoughts were revealed. Instead, they became bold and confident. Yan Feng angrily said, Jun Moxie, you only moved your lips, and you blocked the path of the 5,000 scholars of the Wenxing Heavenly Literature Institute. Do you still have the slightest bit of conscience? We've studied hard from dawn to dusk, and our only hope is to do something for the country and the people. But you, a treacherous and arrogant person, are so despicable that you've destroyed the decades of hard work of 5,000 students in one day. From then on, you would be mediocre, and your bright future would be ruined. Don't tell me that you shouldn't go on an expedition. Don't you feel guilty? Today, you're going against the grain. You're using your uncle to bully your sister-in-law. You're an adulterer, and you're hooking up with others. You're guilty of 1,000 crimes, and your stench has spread throughout the world. You brought this upon yourself, and you can't live. Facing the torrent of criticism from the world, if you still have the slightest bit of shame in your heart, then you should die as an apology to the world. Studying hard, doing something for the country and the people? Just because you're a bunch of bookworms with bad intentions? Do you think you're worthy? For your own personal grudges, you blindly seek revenge, implicate innocent and weak girls, and force people to their deaths. Is this the quality of your service to the country and the people? Jun Moxie snorted disdainfully. Let me tell you, if you want to do something for the country and the people, then you must first correct your own conscience. If your heart isn't right, then you're just a corrupt official. For such people, even if they study hard for a lifetime, they'll still be a pile of sh*t. Jun Moxie said sharply. As for mediocre food, there's no need for that. I can point out a way for you to make a living, and I can guarantee that you'll be rolling in money. He suddenly smiled and said, I have a friend, his surname is Wu, and he's called Wu Shanyun. Everyone calls him Wu Shanyun. He once said something about people like you. I used to think that he was a little too much. Now, I know that what he said was very reasonable. He said, prick your buttocks, hang your head from the beam, eat simple food, and feel indecisive. One day, when you get over it, you'll get 100 taels of silver. Jun Mo Xia laughed heartily, that's why I said that your path is very broad. You only need to peel off that layer of skin of yours, and hide your face under your butt. Then, you'll be rolling in money. Although this path isn't very open at the moment, but the nobles of the various countries have already started to indulge in debauchery. And, this is especially true for famous scholars like you. So, the market is very big, Jun Moxie. You're insulting us. The few scholars hollered angrily, only someone with a filthy heart like yours would think about such things. You're a disgrace to the culture, and you're guilty of the most heinous crimes. You're really a pervert. Pervert? Your granny, do you really think that you're of the upper class? Your methods, your dirty intentions, and you still dare to say that I'm pervert? Jun Moxie's anger suddenly rose. I'm not in the mood to argue about the truth of this matter. I believe that all of you know the inside story. You don't need to deny it. Even if you really don't know, I have no obligation to explain to you. In my eyes, you're a bunch of dog sh*t. A bunch of complete and utter degenerates. Scholars? You're fucking scholars. A bunch of people selling their buttocks. I feel that you're filthy just by looking at you. Thousands of people started shouting and cursing at the same time. In an instant, the scholars' vulgarities were even worse than those in the marketplace. They were angered by June Moxie. They were already furious, and now it was even harder to contain. Guan Qinghan, who was in the carriage, was trembling uncontrollably. She lowered her head and buried her face in her palms. Her shoulders were shaking uncontrollably. Jun Mo Xia roared and suddenly stood up from his horse's back. Since you can be so ruthless, implicating the innocent, and still act so righteously, then don't blame me for being ruthless. Do you really think that I won't dare to do the same thing? As he finished, Jun Moxie circulated his energy and roared, "Bring them up." In an instant, there was a commotion in the crowd. A group of burly men, like a ship breaking through the wind and waves in the sea, separated the crowd and walked over. These people were the members of the Heaven Destroyer team that Jun Moxie had sent to receive Bailey Luo Yun's family. They had already quietly returned to Tianxiang a few days ago and had followed Jun Moxie's instructions to keep an eye on the city. In their hands, there were 3 women. Their bodies were slim and their faces were beautiful. However, their faces were filled with fear. There were also a few people who were holding on to large dogs. There was even someone who was holding on to a large white pig. Yan Feng, Qin Qiushi and Han Zhidong's faces changed as they blurted out, "Wife." It turned out that these 3 women were their wives. I don't have time to talk to you about principles. You're not qualified, and you're not worthy. I can't be bothered to talk to you about righteousness. That's because the righteousness that you think is not worthy of my discussion. I'll only give you 2 choices. Jun Moxie looked down at them with a cruel smile on his face. He was like an eagle looking at a group of rabbits. His expression was filled with arrogance and lawlessness. It was filled with cruelty and cruelty. The first choice. Jun Moxie stretched out a finger, "Immediately kneel down and apologize to me. Then, I'll give each of you a tool. Take it and open the way for me." Shout, "The 3rd young Master Jun is great. The 3rd young Master Jun is noble. The 3rd young Master Jun is the best. We welcome the 3rd young Master Jun back to Tianxiang." Chapter 440. Jun Moxie had been suppressing his tyrannical nature all this while. He suddenly let out a long howl, and his body spun in the air. A bright light flashed in the air. Blood of yellow flame. Unsheathed. "No, don't, spare me." The burly man in midair hadn't even finished his sentence when he was suddenly cut into 2. From his waist down, his body fell to the ground with a splat sound. Even his abdomen had been cut open, and fresh blood flowed out like a huge ball of blood. His internal organs and his steaming hot intestines fell at the same time. But halfway down, they were caught and hung in midair. Only his intestines were like a thin snake, emitting hot steam as they fell from the sky. When they were still a few feet above the ground, they suddenly stopped. Like a blood-red ribbon, it hung on a flagpole. At this moment, the burly man hadn't died yet. He was still screaming, and his upper body was still hanging on the flagpole, twitching and trembling. 2 pu sounds could be heard. Under the intense pain, his eyeballs were forced out of his eye sockets and hung on his face. Fresh blood fell to the ground. Splash! The faces of many people standing in front of them were splashed with some blood. But each of them stood there in a daze, not daring to move a single inch. Only their eyeballs were frozen in fear, and their faces were filled with shock and despair. Such an extremely bloody scene. When had these scholars who only knew how to read books ever seen something like this before? These people had always known how to shut their ears to the outside world, and wholeheartedly read the books of the saints. Normally, they wouldn't even kill a chicken in their own homes. Now that they had witnessed the cruelest and most bloody scene in the world, even fainting had become an extravagant hope. Nobody could have imagined that June Moxie and the three great scholars were discussing something. Although there was an argument, nobody could have imagined that it would reach the point where someone would die. Without any warning, a person flew up into the sky, and the back of his head was fixed on the flagpole. Then, with a schwa sound, the lower half of his body was gone. His stomach was like a bottomless fish tank, and everything was hanging outside. June Moxie had actually created a massacre in broad daylight in front of so many people. Originally, these people's imposing manner was like a rainbow, and they had only one thought in mind: the law does not punish the masses. June Moxie, you can't kill so many of us even if you're so awesome and shameless. In fact, June Moxie didn't even dare to make a move. In the face of so many people's condemnation, he could only run away with his tail between his legs. Your June family will be drowned by the public opinion of the entire Tianxiang as long as you escape. Just a spit from each of them would be enough to drown you. No matter how great the power was, it was still given by the emperor. However, no emperor could ignore the chaos in the world and the reaction of the people. The imperial court would have no choice but to respond once this disturbance reached a subtle point. Then, they would have two options: send troops to suppress it. Or, they would have to use the June family to apologize to the common people, and give the world an explanation. However, there were so many ministers in the imperial court who were against the June family. How could the emperor make the first move? They could only use the banner of the heavens to comply with the will of the people, and sacrifice the June family. At that time, it would be the end of the June family. But no one had expected that June Moxie's reaction would be even more extreme than theirs, even though their plans and actions could already be considered extreme. He didn't run away, nor did he hide. Instead, he puffed out his chest and welcomed them. He didn't talk about any principles, and directly carried out the most bloody and cruel coercion. Thousands of people felt their hearts pounding as they looked at this scene, which was even more cruel and bloody than death by 1,000 cuts. It seemed as if their hearts were about to jump out of their throats. Their vision became blurry, and their ears felt as if they were having auditory hallucinations. Everyone had a strong thought in their minds: I want to leave this place immediately. I don't care if the June family is innocent or not. I don't care who wins or loses in this struggle. I don't care what others think or do. In any case, I don't care about this matter. It has nothing to do with me. It's too scary, ha ha ha. You would rather die a horrible death to stay innocent. Where is your innocence? You've already died a horrible death. But where is the innocence you left? How come I don't see it? June Moxie smiled cruelly. He looked at the pile of blood from afar and sneered, I only see a pile of rotten meat. I don't see any innocence. June Moxie smiled and slowly walked to the front of a middle-aged scholar. He asked in an unusually gentle voice, I don't see his innocence. Do you see it? If you see it, please tell me, okay? That middle-aged scholar was trying his best to squeeze his way back. But his legs were weak and his body was weak. There were not many people behind him. He had used all his strength, but he still couldn't squeeze his way through. He felt as if he had bumped into the toughest iron wall. In the midst of his panic, June Moxie suddenly walked in front of him and asked in an amiable manner. June Moxie's words were like a clap of thunder in his ears. June Moxie's amiable face had turned into that of a demon from hell in his eyes, and he even seemed to have two horns on his head. The middle-aged scholar looked at June Moxie in despair. His throat made a gulping sound. Then, he fell to the ground like a noodle and fainted. Sigh, why are you so useless? Could it be that this young master's tone is not gentle enough? Jun Moxie shook his head regretfully. He walked to the front of another person. He didn't answer me. Now you take a look. Is there any innocence in there? Take a good look and then answer me. I really want to know. This person stared blankly at the bloodstain for a while. His face was as pale as a corpse in a coffin. He almost subconsciously shook his head in a daze. Jun Moxie let out a sigh of relief and said, "So you didn't see it either." "I thought I saw wrongly." He screamed so loudly that I really believed it was true. I thought that after his body was smashed to pieces, he really did have innocence. How shameful. Jun Moxie turned and walked away. Only then did this person react. He suddenly squatted on the ground and vomited. He almost vomited his liver and intestines out. I asked a few people in a row. Unfortunately, none of them saw the innocence that person spoke of. Why don't you guys take a look as well? Jun Moxie leisurely walked in front of the three great scholars. He kicked the unconscious Yen Feng and injected his spiritual energy into him. Yen Feng immediately woke up. One in each hand, Jun Moxie dragged the three people in front of the bloodstain. He fiercely pressed the three people's heads against the bloodstain. He was less than half a foot away from the bloodstain. He said viciously, "Come. Take a good look at me. Find out your innocence for me. Where is it? I'm really very interested." He smiled cruelly and said darkly, "Innocence? Humph. I want to see the innocence of the three of you later too. Motherfucker." The three people's heads were forcefully pressed against the ground. Looking at the bloody scene in front of them, they felt as if their brains had been ruthlessly smashed by a hammer. They felt so disgusted that they wanted to vomit. Above their heads, the burly man had lived a long life. Up until now, he hadn't died completely. He was letting out long and short moans of despair. The three of them felt as if they were in hell. There was a strong sense of fear that made them want to faint. However, at this moment, their nerves were unusually strong. They actually couldn't faint. The most ridiculous thing was that they couldn't close their eyes even if they wanted to. They could only open their eyes as wide as they could and look at the cruelest scene in this world. Have you seen it clearly? Is there any innocence? If there is, tell me quickly. I'm really very interested. Jun Moxie's unusually gentle voice sounded again. The three of them simultaneously trembled as if they were suffering from malaria. Answer my question. Because you're going to be like them in a while. I'm also going to send people to find your innocence. Tell me, have you seen any innocence? No. The three of them were like three piles of mud. They fell to the ground and shook their heads desperately. Then, do you still want your innocence? Jun Moxie's voice was like a devil's smile. No. I don't want it anymore. The three of them shook their heads violently. Very well. Then, there are two choices. Which one do you choose? Jun Moxie guided them patiently. His voice was gentle and pleasant to listen to. I choose the first. The three of them fought to be the first to shout. The fear of death had already shattered the persistence in their hearts for a long time. What benevolence and morality? What customs of the government? What integrity and justice? What was more important than their own lives? Their survival was the most important thing. Very good. I'm very gratified by your choices. I'm very satisfied. Jun Moxie was obviously gratified as he praised them. Jun. Third young master Jun. I know who's the mastermind behind this matter. Qin Qiushi suddenly raised his head and shouted in a hoarse voice, I'm willing to tell you. I only beg you, to spare my life, spare our lives. It seemed that this gifted scholar Qin Qiushi had decided to forsake the darkness for the light under the pressure of death. He wanted to turn over a new leaf. However, this youngster was a smart man. He had already guessed that June Moxie wouldn't allow them to live after this matter was over. So, begging for mercy at this moment was an appropriate opportunity, even though it would be a loss of face. They might not even be able to see June Moxie's face after today. Spare your lives. I didn't expect that you would still have the guts to bargain with me. Truth be told, June Moxie hadn't thought about this matter. After all, he had never been a magnanimous person. A person would have to pay the corresponding price for doing something wrong. So, it would still be a mistake even if it was remedied afterwards. It wouldn't help. The mastermind behind this? June Moxie snorted twice. Do you think I don't know about it? I know better than you who the mastermind behind this matter is, but I'll think about sparing your lives. Now, open a path for me. June Moxie's voice was as cold as ice. He waved his hand, and spun around. Then, his entire body moved like a whirlwind. Nobody could see what had happened. He stopped, and three strange-looking things appeared in his hand. They looked like loudspeakers. However, they were much thinner than ordinary loudspeakers. These things were simple and crude. However, they were the first to appear in this world. They were the most primitive loudspeakers. Chapter 441. After June Moxie finished speaking, he looked at the dumbstruck crowd that still hadn't reacted in time. He chuckled lightly and said sinisterly, "You're still not leaving? Do you want to be like him? You'd rather die a horrible death in order to keep your innocence in this world? Anyway, I'm very interested in this innocence. Maybe you really have it on you. Hey, come on, take it out and let me see." Thousands of people stepped back in unison. Many people screamed in pain and fell to the ground in fright as they were stepped on by others. I'll say it one last time, and only this time. From now on, Tianxiang City. I won't allow this kind of thing to be heard again. June Moxie coldly glanced around and said in a voice as cold as the winds of hell, "Your mouths are on your bodies. You can talk about it in private, but that's your business. I won't forbid it, but as long as I hear it, I'll look for your innocence. The innocence of your 9 families. All of you, get lost." June Moxie shouted. Suddenly, the crowd screamed in panic, and thousands of people rolled and crawled away in embarrassment. "These lowly literati are delusional enough to cause trouble for me, June Moxie." June Moxie laughed heartily. Then, his body suddenly floated up, and he jumped onto the top of the flagpole. Then, he stepped on the head of the Meng family's man, and shouted towards the entire Tianxiang city, "Are you tired of living?" His voice was like thunder, and rolled throughout Tianxiang city. His surging momentum was accompanied by an unparalleled murderous aura. It was as if a thunderstorm had crashed down from the sky, and forcibly plowed a path through the city gate. June Moxie stood in the middle of the city gate, and the sun was shining down on him. His shadow was long, and seeped into the city gate. It seemed as if he wanted to bring the ancient city into his shadow in one fell swoop. In front of him, there were thousands of people running like wolves, rolling and crawling to escape. June Moxie's aura was like a sword, like a knife, like a crazy devil, rushing straight into the city gate. Behind him, there were many people who didn't know the truth, but they couldn't help but be intimidated by June Moxie's shocking aura and made way for him. A wide and orderly road. June Moxie twisted his neck and looked at the city gate from the corner of his eyes. Then, he waved his horsewhip in the air and with a crisp crack, he tilted his head and snorted, "Follow me into the city. I want to see how many gossips there are in the Tianxiang city today. How many of them were brave warriors who were not afraid of death? How many people wanted to keep their chastity, and in the end, how many people could keep their chastity? I want to count them one by one." June Moxie clamped his legs together and the sound of hooves could be heard. He took the lead and leisurely entered the city gate. Tens of thousands of people watched him gallop after them, and kept quiet out of fear. Guan Qing Han and the other two women's carriages followed behind him and moved forward slowly. Da Xiao's words had made everyone's blood boil. However, there were still exceptions, and Jun Wuyi was the only exception. Jun Wuyi squinted at Jun Moxie's tall and straight back, and couldn't help but mutter, "Damn it, you keep saying I, but you don't even know how to turn around and look at me. You're putting me, your real uncle, in this position. This is too much." He snorted hatefully, and sullenly followed behind the carriage into the city. Jun Moxie was riding on his horse. His body was cold and gloomy, and his face was gloomy. His body was straight, and his lips were slightly pursed. His sword-like eyebrows were slightly raised. Wherever he looked, there would be a commotion of panic. Suddenly, an unusually subtle but clear voice whispered, "I don't know what he's so proud of. He's committing adultery with his sister-in-law, and he's still so arrogant. Shameless." Jun Moxie's body remained motionless as he rode on his horse. But, a silver light flashed from his sleeve, and a skinny man was pulled out of the crowd with a bang sound. The young Master Jun had acted even more straightforwardly this time. In fact, he hadn't even asked any questions. He had simply waved his hand, and that man had been hung on the flagpole. There was a bloody hole in his throat, and the look of disdain on his face hadn't even disappeared yet. The golden light of Xian Qi on this man's body only flashed once, and was immediately destroyed. He was obviously a Xian Qi expert, and had hidden in the crowd to stir up trouble. However, he was relatively lucky, because he had already breathed his last the moment he was hung on the flagpole. Cries of alarm rang out from all directions, and the crowd once again began to retreat with all their might. They looked at Jun Moxie with endless fear in their eyes. Could it be that this brat had already gone mad? Was he really going to kill people so brazenly like what he had just said? At the back of the crowd, a few men were drenched in cold sweat, and they ran back with all their might. Their legs were practically jelly, and they quickly escaped. However, under the envelopment of Jun Moxie's enormous mental strength, how could they possibly escape safely? Jun Moxie's gaze turned cold, and he raised both his hands. A golden light flashed, and disappeared in a flash. 7 or 8 burly men suddenly fell to the ground as they ran. There was a small bloody hole in the middle of each of their backs. In front of each of them, there was a golden flying knife stuck into the bluestone ground. Under the sunlight, it shone with a brilliant golden light. A few members of the Heaven Destroyer team quickly ran over, and picked up the flying daggers one by one, and respectfully returned them. Jun Moxie's eyes were expressionless as he reached out to receive them. The 8 flying daggers spun around in his hands, and as the golden light lingered around them, they mysteriously disappeared. He continued to advance with a calm face. His handsome face clearly had one sentence written on it: "I've said everything that needs to be said, and I will not repeat myself a second time. As long as someone dares to open their mouth, I will dare to kill. As long as you open your mouth, you deserve to die, and you must die. Absolute. No. No. Sigh." In front of them, the 3 scholars grabbed onto Jun Moxie's special megaphone, and shouted at the top of their lungs, as if they were crying, "The 3rd young Master Jun is great, the 3rd young Master Jun is noble, the best person in the world, the kindest person, and the most benevolent person. We welcome the 3rd young Master Jun back to Tianxiang." They shouted over and over again like a machine. In fact, they didn't even know what they were shouting. Their faces were streaming with tears, and their faces were filled with endless humiliation. But, they didn't dare to act rashly. The shadow of death was still hanging over their heads. Their voices had become hoarse, and their throats had become swollen. But, they didn't dare to stop. Their only goal at this moment was to survive. So, what if they suffered a little? Suddenly, 30 or 40 people appeared in front of them. They were the students of the Wenqing Heavenly Literature Institute. One of them greeted them in surprise: "Brother Han. Brother Yen. Brother Qin. What are you doing? Are you crazy? You're opening a path for that despicable villain. Qin Xiu and the other two didn't dare to answer him. They could only give him a meaningful glance, and signal him to hurry up. However, this scholar seemed to have suddenly understood something. He was filled with righteous indignation, and said angrily, Jun Moxie. You're a shameless bastard. You've committed adultery with a widowed sister-in-law. You're morally corrupt. But, you're humiliating a talented scholar of Tianxiang. You've gone too far. Many people had seen the bloody scene on this side. So, they had understood many things. So, several of them stepped forward and tried to pull him back. However, this brat was stubborn. He continued to shout and shout, such a shameless bastard. Sure Wenchong, will never forgive him. Jun Moxie's cold gaze swept over. Then, he raised his eyebrows and indifferently said, kill. A sword light flew out. It didn't matter who it was. It chopped the scholars who had blocked its way into two pieces. The scholar who had been shouting a moment ago had a look of disbelief in his eyes. Then, he collapsed in a pool of blood. Jun Moxie spurred his horse and arrived in front of the scholar's body. Then, he sighed and said in a low voice, perhaps you really have the guts to do this. Perhaps you didn't want to make things difficult for me. But, this is only a possibility, nothing more. You've appeared at this moment. But, I have no choice but to kill you. A man's words must be kept. How can a man not keep his word? I've made a promise. You may not dare to believe it. But, I also feel somewhat regretful. You must remember to fulfill 2 conditions in your next life when you come out to act pretentious. Jun Moxie's complexion was indifferent. He spurred his horse forward, and didn't turn his head. But, his voice was heard in a soft voice, first, you must have the strength to deal with all variables. Second, you must have a formidable background that no one would dare to provoke. If you only rely on your backbone and guts, you will only be a target for others to establish their prestige, and will never become a hero. You may have an unyielding backbone. But, you're only a pitiful worm in my eyes at this moment. You failed to act pretentious. You didn't die unjustly. The scholar surnamed Sure hadn't died yet even though he had been chopped off. He closed his eyes with tears streaming down his face after he heard Jun Moxie's words. He then muttered, Benefactor, you were wrong. Before he died. Jun Moxie's face slightly twitched as he was several dozen feet away. Benefactor? Mei Gao Jie. Kong Ling Yang. Suddenly, he lashed his horsewhip on the bodies of the 3 scholars in front of him. They screamed in pain as they turned their heads. Jun Moxie closed his eyes and insipidly said, Speak louder. Tell me whose sect you belong to. Then, shout that Mei Gao Jia is an old turtle, Kong Ling Yang is an old tortoise, and the Meng family is a nest of bastards. Don't you want to die? I'll guarantee your lives if you do this. The 3 scholars collapsed. The heaven, the earth, the monarch, and the teacher were the background of this era. But, the teacher's position was extremely venerated even though he was the last of the 5. Mei Gao and Kong Ling Yang were the teachers of these 3 scholars. So, they couldn't even consider whether the Jun family would drown in their spittle if they were to insult them in the street. After all, the 3 of them would drown first. And, there's also the Meng family. Jun Moxie has remarkable abilities, and his methods are brilliant. He isn't afraid of the Meng family. But, what about us? Oh my God! What kind of sin have we committed? Jun Wui spurred his horse forward and spoke in a deep voice, Moxia, this is too much. Be careful of the imperial court's interference. Chapter 442. Super aristocratic family. Jun Wui was speechless. His thoughts hadn't changed yet. Just like that, they became a super aristocratic family. They were still the same people. Not a single one of them had changed, and yet, they had become super. June Moxie Lenglang smiled and continued, moreover, the royal family. I only lack the so-called real evidence. If I had the evidence, then it wouldn't be impossible for me to turn the entire Tianxiang city into a pile of ruins in an instant. The third uncle, the Silver Blizzard City's Xiaobuyu, said that he had gone to the Blood Sword Hall. Even if it was the Blood Sword Hall, they were just an assassin organization. How could they have the ability to freely enter and exit an army of 1 million soldiers, and that pass token? Third uncle, don't tell me you haven't thought about it. What does it all mean, and what is connected to it? Now that things have come to this, if we have too many misgivings, we'll only be at a disadvantage. After all, in comparison, we are still at a certain disadvantage, so, we must be strong at this time. Absolute power. Only then can we prove that we have a real backing behind us. Everyone was afraid to act rashly for fear of harming innocent bystanders. This period of time is our time. What we lack now is time. Even one day is enough to change everything. June Moxie's face turned solemn as he thought about the elixirs he had collected and the level 9 Xian Dan, the Xian Dan. Everyone was ready, the herbs were ready, and Solitary Eagle was here. With the protection of the art of unlocking heaven's fortune, grandfather's advancement was unstoppable. Then, he would think of a way to promote Jun Wui to Shenxian, and the Heaven Destroyer and Spirit Devourer teams under him would be promoted once more. Then, he would add in Bailey Luoyun and Hai Chenfeng's forces. At that time, they could barely be considered a super-aristocratic family. And now, although they boasted of being a super-aristocratic family, they were only an empty shell. So, at this juncture, they absolutely could not make any mistakes. Jun Wui's face convulsed painfully. What June Moxie said was exactly the thing that he had been suppressing for 10 years. It was something that he had been extremely suspicious about. She was also his other demon. How could Jun Wui not have suspected it? However, he really didn't want to believe that the Tianxiang that his family had sacrificed everything for, would treat him like this. This was not cowardice, but human nature. After all, the Jun family had bathed in blood on the battlefield to get to Tianxiang. If he believed this cruel truth, it would be the same as destroying everything he had built with all his effort. To anyone, this was an unbearable burden in their life. However, don't act rashly before you have concrete evidence. Jun Wui lowered his voice. You can say that to me, but don't mention it to your grandfather unless you have solid evidence. His temper, of course. Jun Moxie smiled and said meaningfully, Third uncle, you're not stupid. I'm not stupid either. Grandpa is not stupid either. Ha, you should rest assured that our emperor is not stupid either. Jun Wui heaved a long sigh. He didn't say anything, and slowly retreated. Jun Moxie's eyes regained their ice-cold expression. He brandished his horsewhip, and 3 bang. Bang, sounds were heard. The 3 scholars were hit by the whip, and their bodies twitched. However, they didn't dare to shout. Jun Moxie's gloomy tone was filled with murderous intention as he said in a heavy tone, Shout for me. The 3 scholars scrambled to shout under the unprecedented murderous aura, I'm Han Ji Dong from the Wenxing Institute. The 3rd young Master Jun is great. He's noble. He's the best. We welcome the 3rd young Master Jun back to Tianxiang. Mei Gao Jia is an old turtle. Kong Ling Yang is an old tortoise. And, the Meng family is a nest of turtles. It was strange to say that the 3 scholars' curses had become smoother and smoother as soon as they had spoken those first words. Moreover, they had become more and more fluent in their curses. They had started to curse at all sorts of vicious and despicable things. However, this was because they had lost all sense of honor and shame after they had spoken those first words. So, they had started to pour out their curses in an unceasing and fluent manner. Jun Moxie was like a brothel keeper who had succeeded in forcing an innocent woman to become a prostitute. He was gritting his teeth as he laughed heartily. He was immensely proud of himself as he spurred his horse forward. The bystanders looked at him as if they were looking at a visitor from hell. Thousands of people's eyeballs froze at this moment. The Tianxiang city was in complete chaos. Jun Moxie's entrance into the city was like an unprecedented violent storm. And it had engulfed the entire Tianxiang city in a split second. All the aristocratic families had started to move the moment Jun Moxie had entered the city. Countless letters of impeachment had been sent to the imperial palace like snowflakes. Several old men had even entered the imperial palace in palanquins. The Dugu family was watching the show. The Li family didn't make any movements. The Tang family was also silent. The Murong family had sent a few people to inquire about the situation. Then, they had disappeared without a trace. Grandpa Jun was sitting calmly on the fishing platform. He had proudly ordered the kitchen to prepare the best dishes and wine. His son and grandson had returned. So, he was prepared to drink to his heart's content. As for the matters outside, he had his son and grandson. So, why would he still need his father's help? It had to be said that Mo Xie's way of doing things was extremely daring. However, this was also the best way to deal with the situation. Since he was already standing against the world, then he might as well be arrogant to the end. The Jun family's ancestral precept, he who has a bird under his crotch must be a man. He who has an indomitable spirit must go to hell. Not bad, not bad. This time, I will go to hell. I will do whatever I want. Ha ha ha, the old man took a sip of wine and laughed happily. Mo Xie's actions had created a strong deterrent force. Moreover, the solitary falcon was one of the 8 great masters, and Mo Xie had fought against 4 spirit Xian experts by himself. Moreover, the Jun family was backed by a mysterious expert who was considered to be the world's #1 expert. The Jun family's reputation as a super family had been thoroughly solidified. So, how could they possibly run away from it? The Jun family could finally hold its head up high. As for the mess in the imperial court, they could join forces with the Murong family and the Dugu family to suppress those poor people. That way, they wouldn't be able to make any noise. They could even be ignored. I am in a good mood now. If I was in a bad mood, I would have exterminated them. Grandpa Jun had completely forgotten how anxious he had been a few days ago. His face was as calm as Mount Tai. As for His Majesty's face, cough cough. I don't want to think about it. In any case, the empire doesn't have the ability to deal with the Jun family. Innocent people are innocent. The Song family and the other families were like ants on a hot pan. They were in a mess. The Meng family was even more unbearable. They were like a bald dog whose tail had been cut off. They were desperately sending memorials to the imperial palace. Then, they would run to the Li family again and again. They were vainly trying to grasp that non-existent straw of hope. However, they couldn't find anyone. The Meng family's lord, Meng Yuwei, had returned from the Li family dejectedly when he heard the 3 great scholars cursing Mei Gao Jia, Kong Ling Yang, and the Meng family. He had asked to see them several times in a row, but to no avail. So, he had been left in a daze for a long time. Old Master Mei Gao Jia had been waiting for the good news at home. However, he had fainted in anger when he had heard his proud disciple cursing him in the streets. The aristocratic hall's Fatty Tang had received the news that the young Master Jun had entered the city. And, he had jumped up like a rubber ball. He had wanted to go out and greet the young master. But, Hai Chen-feng and Song Shang had firmly held him back. The reason for this was very simple. Jun Mo Xie had solemnly instructed that Tang Yuan shouldn't get involved in the storm that would ensue after his return. Other people might not dare to touch the Jun family. But, that didn't mean that they wouldn't dare to touch the Tang family. After all, the Tang family was the weakest of the Tianxiang's families. Moreover, Fatty and Jun Moxie were very close friends. But, the Tang family's lord, Old Master Tang, was a die-hard supporter of the Tianxiang imperial family. So, it was better not to make things difficult for his brothers. So, Jun Moxie had to shoulder the responsibility for this matter. Alone in Tianxiang, Jun Moxie finally arrived at the Jun family's residence. He dismounted from his horse and walked up the doorstep. He was about to enter the residence when he suddenly turned around and gave his last order, "Go. Smash all the Meng family's properties in Tianxiang City. Whether they are in the open or in the dark, I want them all smashed." "Ah, not good. I'll let Hai Chen-feng take over all of them. Just beat them up once. Keep an eye on the person in charge, and make sure that he's clean. If the Meng family isn't satisfied, tell them that I, Jun Moxie, said that they would take some interest first. And, we'll settle the accounts later." 50 or 60 members of the Heaven Destroyer team complied in unison. They then rushed out, take over all the Meng family's properties. And, it's only a little interest. We'll settle the accounts later. Jun Wui rolled his eyes. He felt that he couldn't see through this nephew of his anymore. The emperor was frowning in the imperial palace. Mr. Wen was sitting opposite him. The two of them used to talk while playing chess. But, the emperor wasn't in the mood to play chess and discuss the world at this time. He was deeply worried. The emperor's face revealed a trace of bitterness and helplessness as he looked at the mountain of memorials placed beside him. The contents of the memorials were almost the same. Request for the punishment of Jun Moxie. Request for the punishment of Jun Moxie. Jun Moxie is lawless and out of control. He has no respect for the emperor. He has caused chaos in the capital and shamed the world. He should be sentenced to death. Your Majesty, please make a decision. Request for the emperor to make a decision quickly. If this goes on, the country will no longer be a country. Request for the emperor to make a decision quickly. The emperor heaved a long sigh. Make a decision. I also want to make a decision. No one is more eager than me to get rid of Jun Moxie. But, aren't you thinking too highly of me? A person should have some self-awareness, right? Jun Zhantian's strength was quite strong. But, he was only at the peak of Tianxian. He couldn't advance any further. And, that's because the Blizzard Silver City wouldn't be able to tolerate his progress. Jun Zhantian may have other military forces. But, I still have a way to take drastic measures. That day, I punished Jun Wui and Jun Moxie for an expedition to the Southern Heaven City. That was the first step in destroying the Jun family. But, the affairs of the world are like a game of chess. Every step is filled with trepidation. It's difficult for everything to go according to one's wishes. Not only did Jun Wui and his nephew not suffer any harm during the expedition to the Southern Heaven City, but they also enjoyed the limelight. Moreover, Jun Moxie was able to single-handedly defeat 4 Shenxians. What kind of strength was required to achieve such a feat? This is simply unimaginable. Chapter 443. Your Majesty, you seem to have a lot on your mind. Mr. Wen had just returned from outside. He had witnessed Jun Moxie's massacre. He leisurely raised his head, and looked at the emperor with wise and far-sighted eyes. Then, he smiled and said, "Is it because of that? Jun Moxie?" "Yes." The emperor faintly sighed. He strolled to the window, and looked at the sunset outside. He remained motionless for a long time. Your Majesty doesn't need to be so worried. In fact, this may not be a bad thing in the long run. Mr. Wen remained silent for a while. Then, he said, the Jun family is powerful. But, it can be said that their influence is too great. In fact, it has already exceeded a certain scope. In fact, it is no longer a threat to the imperial family, exceeded a certain scope? No threat? The emperor frowned. What do you mean? That's right. the Jun family would have become as deeply rooted as the Murong family if they had gradually developed. Then, they would have been able to overturn the heavens. In fact, it wouldn't have been difficult for them to change dynasties. But, the Jun family's power has grown too quickly. They've become one of the most powerful families in the world in a short span of 3 or 4 months. He. Your Majesty, do you know where these families have been since ancient times? Mr. Wen smiled leisurely. These families have a very special place. They don't have much interest in the so-called imperial throne or imperial power. I'm sure that the Jun family will slowly fade away from the imperial court after a period of stability. They will stroll among the clouds and observe the vicissitudes of life. This has been the rule since ancient times. And all the families are the same. There are no exceptions. That's because these families don't pursue a brief period of splendor. Instead, they pursue a long history that will last for thousands of generations. They laugh at the freedom of the wind and clouds. And they secretly control the universe. Therefore, Your Majesty only needs to choose to be patient for the time being. When this nouveau riche super-aristocratic family has shown off its might and is tired of showing off, they will naturally find their own place. Within the borders of the Tianxiang Empire, the emergence of such a super-family was a great deterrent to the surrounding countries. This time, the reason why Jun Moxie's affair with Uncle Ling and his sister-in-law had caused such a huge reaction was not only because of the Jun family's old enemies, but also because the various countries felt threatened and took the opportunity to make a fuss. Even if they didn't get rid of the Jun family, they still had to make the Tianxiang imperial family and the Jun family hostile. Otherwise. He chuckled softly. Even if Uncle Ling's sister-in-law is morally corrupt, how could it cause such a big incident? Does that fellow Jun Moxie have a good reputation in the past? Your Majesty has always been wise and far-sighted. So, how could you think of the worst possible outcome? Jun Moxie may be unruly, but that old man Jun Zhantian and Jun Wui will certainly accept Your Majesty's goodwill. How could I not know what you're saying? The emperor stood with his hands behind his back. His complexion was bleak, but that's not the problem. The biggest problem lies in the Blood Sword Hall, the Blood Sword Hall. I remember that Your Majesty had mentioned that the Blood Sword Hall is one of the secret forces in Your Majesty's hands. So, I can roughly guess the truth of this matter with Xiao Buyu's confession. And, that is the death of Jun Wuhui and Jun Wu Meng. But, the Jun family doesn't have any concrete evidence at the moment. Jun Zhantian and Jun Wui still have the final say in the Jun family. But, both of them have deep feelings for the Tianxiang Empire. They are very sentimental. Mr. Wen smiled. Your Majesty, it's hard to leave a warm land. Jun Moxie doesn't care. But, Jun Zhantian can't ignore it. So, there's still room for mediation. Room for mediation. Room for mediation. The Emperor's eyes lit up. That's right. That incident happened a long time ago. Your Majesty hasn't revealed anything. But, how could Jun Zhantian and Jun Wui not have any suspicions? You must know that the Blood Sword Hall is only an assassin organization, no matter how strong they are. How could they control the army? But, Jun Zhantian and his son have been suspicious for 10 years. But, they haven't made a move. They haven't even sought revenge. Does Your Majesty know why? Mr. Wen's expression was calm and confident. Why? I don't think that the Jun family doesn't suspect Your Majesty. It's because their entire family has done too much for the Tianxiang Empire, whether they're alive or dead. And, that's why they've done too much. Mr. Wen continued in a serious manner. The Jun family has always been the mainstay of the Tianxiang Empire for decades. They've saved the Tianxiang Empire. They've made the greatest contribution to the Tianxiang Empire's construction. The Tianxiang Empire has a radius of tens of thousands of miles. And, there are millions of people living there. But, the Jun family's blood, tears, and sweat have contributed to the peace and happiness of the Tianxiang Empire. In fact, the Jun family's generations of painstaking efforts have made this situation possible. Mr. Wen smiled in a carefree manner. Your Majesty, put yourself in their shoes. You've done so much for the empire. You've sacrificed 2 generations of painstaking efforts. But, would you really have the heart to destroy everything with your own hands? Would you destroy your greatest achievement? Would you destroy the peace and happiness of millions of people? That's right. The Jun family has always prided themselves on being a benevolent family. So, they wouldn't do such a thing. The emperor's eyes flashed. His mind had broadened as he walked back and forth in excitement. However, there are some things that need to be explained. Your Majesty, I'll give you another word. Mr. Wen smiled mysteriously. Then, he pointed his palm downwards and said, abandon. Abandon? The emperor's body shook. His joyful expression hadn't yet faded when he said in a daze, abandon? His heart was filled with bitterness. Those are my most elite forces. They have made countless contributions to the empire over the years. Those people are desperate for the emperor's throne. The Juyi family and the Jun family, these people have undoubtedly made great contributions. Moreover, they are my loyal subordinates. Do I really have to abandon them? Yes, abandon. We can't abandon them. We have no choice but to abandon them. Mr. Wen replied without any hesitation, we must confront the Jun family if we don't abandon the Blood Sword Hall. But, can the Jun family confront them? Can they dare to confront them? But, the emperor's throne may be secondary if the situation worsens. Your Majesty's life and the safety of the entire Tianxiang imperial family. The emperor's face turned gloomy. His body suddenly swayed. Abandoning the Blood Sword Hall isn't for Jun Zhantian. Nor is it for Jun Wui. But, it's for Jun Moxie. Mr. Wen sighed and continued, Jun Zhantian and Jun Wui have devoted their entire lives for the sake of Tianxiang. So, there's no need to doubt their feelings for Tianxiang. But, these 2 men won't go too far even if they're aware that Jun Wuhui and the others are part of His Majesty's plan. But, I'm sure that they won't go too far even if they know that Jun Wuhui and the others are part of His Majesty's plan. Jun Zhantian's entire life and Jun Wui's half of his life have all been for the sake of Tianxiang. In fact, Jun Wuhui's life, Jun Wumeng's life, and the other 2 Jun brats' deaths have all been for the sake of Tianxiang. Tianxiang is the Jun family's spiritual pillar. It's their life's blood and sweat. And, it's their greatest consolation. I'm sure that Jun Zhantian would have found out about this even if he had solid evidence. His Majesty would have only needed to wantonly reward them. Then, he would have apologized. Then, he would have sworn an oath that he would never betray them. And, I'm sure that they would have pinched their noses and accepted it. But, they wouldn't have done it for the sake of the country's people. Your Majesty, I can't be wrong. Jun Zhantian and Jun Wui are good men for the sake of the country and its people. They're courageous men who treat each other with sincerity. Therefore, the 2 of them can be ignored. But, Jun Moxie is different. He's completely different. He's very much like his father. Jun Wuhui had been very wise even before he had personally led the army. He had never revealed his talents. And, it seems that Jun Moxie is also the same. He had suddenly risen to prominence half a year ago. This debauchee of the past was like an unbridled whirlwind. And, he had madly swept from the Tianxiang city to the southern heaven city. He could have been restrained in Tianxiang. But, he's fully fledged now that he's returned from the southern heaven city. A young eagle spreads its wings. It's still young, but it's already high up in the clouds. And, it can look down on the world. Moreover, this boy's temperament is vicious. He's always been vengeful since he started his cultivation. Moreover, He's cruel and merciless. He's firm and resolute. He doesn't hesitate to kill. So, he can't be underestimated. Moreover, he has a powerful backer. So, he doesn't have any scruples. He does what he wants, and looks down on the common people. It can be seen from the moment he entered the city that he doesn't care about the lives of the people in this world. He doesn't care about blood. And, he doesn't care about sins. This kind of person is the most frightening. Your Majesty isn't afraid that Jun Zhantian and Jun Wu-yi will get their hands on concrete evidence. But, everything will come to an end if this kid gets his hands on any evidence. Is there no other way besides abandoning it? I'm really... The king's face was pale, but he clenched his fists. He clenched his fists, as if he had made up his mind. This is the safest and most dependable method. To deal with a person like Jun Moxie, no. The most important thing to guard against a person like Jun Mo Xia was to make sure that he wouldn't be able to get hold of any evidence against him. Your Majesty, you must know that the biggest difference between Jun Moxie and Jun Zhantian is that he doesn't have any feelings for Tian Xiang. Moreover, it seems that Jun Moxie, Mr. Wen's eyes revealed a strange look. It seemed as if he was afraid. He what? The Emperor asked. Chapter 444. The more Mr. Wen spoke, the more serious his tone became. Even the most famous cold-blooded expert of the present age, Lei Wu Bei, wouldn't be able to be as calm as Jun Mo Xia in this regard. His contempt for human life is ingrained in his bones, and his thirst for blood is ingrained in his soul. Your Majesty, Jun Moxie is far more dangerous than anyone else. This is a creature born to kill. Even the supreme assassin Chu Chi-hun might not be able to match this level of danger. Mr. Wen paused for a long time. He couldn't describe what he was feeling. So, he unconsciously stopped speaking. His Majesty the Emperor quivered, and shivered. Mr. Wen didn't need to explain it too clearly. The Emperor had already realized it. The consequences could be imagined if Jun Moxie were to get his hands on the evidence that he had framed his father. Jun Moxie will do whatever it takes to get his hands on it. And, the Emperor won't be able to shake the strength of Jun Moxie's current strength. I won't be sure even if I launch a surprise attack. The Jun family will be a rare top-notch expert if they manage to escape. So, I'll have to be on tenterhooks every day in order to guard against the assassination and revenge of such an expert. My days will be miserable. That heavy psychological pressure will be enough to make a person drink a pot of water, the Blood Sword Hall. I have no choice but to abandon it. I have to abandon it. Moreover, we can only be gentle with the Jun family. We can only be gentle to the very end. Mr. Wen suddenly smiled. I believe that the Jun family doesn't have any concrete evidence at the moment. So, there's still a leeway for us to turn the situation around. But, it won't be impossible for your Majesty to repair the relationship between the two families. I remember that Senior Jun had proposed to your Majesty that Jun Moxie would marry Princess Raimu 6 months ago. The Emperor's eyes were fixed on the setting sun. He then took a deep breath and said, "Yes, that's true." Mr. Wen smiled. Then, your Majesty should have a plan. The Emperor was silent for a moment and let out a long sigh, as if he still felt it was inappropriate. He suddenly asked, "Sir, I wonder if there are any young talents in the Hermitage?" Mr. Wen was startled. He pondered for a long time and said, "Nothing. Although there are many otherworldly experts in the Immortal Palace, they are not young anymore. How can they still have such worldly thoughts?" The Emperor said unwillingly, "Then, the young Palace Lord of the Immortal Palace." The young Palace Lord is almost 60 years old this year. Mr. Wen smiled bitterly. The young Palace Lord's son is 30 years old, and his grandson is only 5 or 6 years old. Moreover, the Immortal Palace Lord may not be willing to make an enemy out of the Jun family even if the Emperor wishes to establish a connection with the Jun family. After all, the strength of the Jun family is unfathomable. The emperor finally sighed and said, that being the case, we have no choice but to let Jun Moxie benefit from it. Mr. Wen also sighed and said, Your Majesty, you mustn't be too optimistic. It's hard to say whether the Jun family will agree to this matter. It's hard to send charcoal in snowy weather, but it's hard to add flowers to brocade. The room became silent. Neither of them spoke again. Then, they sighed at the same time after a long time. In the Dugu family, old man Dugu Zongheng's eyes opened wide like copper bells. He looked at his granddaughter who had been graceful a few months ago. But now, she was walking down the palanquin like a penguin. She was swaying while holding her big belly. Old man Dugu felt as if all the blood in his body had rushed to his head. Dugu Xiaoyi's mother let out an ah sound. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. She covered her mouth, and tears started to fall down. Everyone was petrified with their mouths agape. Old man Dugu finally came back to his senses. He was like a crazy tiger in a cage. He circled around several times. But, he couldn't find anything to vent his anger on. So, he suddenly roared in a depressed manner. Then, he ferociously pounced on one of his sons. Then, he started to beat up his 7 grandsons. He didn't care about his body or his head, and started to beat them up in a frenzied manner. He shouted and cursed as he beat them. His accent was very chaotic. Nobody knew what he was cursing. The heroes and legends rushed forward. The 7 bull-like men covered their heads, and squatted down in a circle. Then, they stuck out their butts. Cough cough. You can beat them as much as you want. But, don't hit our faces. These 7 15th days of the 8th month will be dedicated to you. Great General Dugu Wudi covered his head and scurried away like a rat. Dugu Xiaoyi quickly came forward to mediate. The effect was very obvious wherever she went. Everyone stayed far away from her. In fact, they were afraid of touching her. That would be terrible. Therefore, Dugu Xiaoyi became more and more complacent. She ran here and there like a firefighter. In fact, it seemed as if she was playing a fun game. A large group of women followed behind her, and shouted at her to stop. Old man Dugu Zongheng's anger wasn't a rare thing in the Dugu family. Dugu Xiaoyi had also gotten used to it. But, Dugu Xiaoyi seemed to have gotten carried away. After all, it wasn't fun to tie such a thick pillow to one's body. Moreover, it wasn't very sturdy. But, it couldn't stop one's body from running. Therefore, it was a miracle that one could hold on until now. Therefore, they held on for a little while. Then, the old lady had been staring at her granddaughter since she had come in. But, she had suddenly discovered something that had shocked her. The old lady had felt something strange the moment Dugu Xiaoyi had come in. Look at this girl. She doesn't look like, what? Her eyebrows are tightly knitted. Her neck is straight. Her legs are long and slender. She doesn't look like she has lost her virginity. So, how can she have such a big belly? Besides, it has only been a few days. So, how can she have such a big body? The old lady's first impression was the strongest. Therefore, she couldn't figure out the mystery behind it. She was puzzled when she saw Dugu Xiaoyi's big belly slowly slide down as she ran. It started to slide from her chest to her lower abdomen. Moreover, it continued to slide down until it reached her thighs. The old lady's eyes suddenly opened wide. Dugu Xiaoyi had also sensed that something was wrong. So, she quickly and stealthily used her hands to support her lower abdomen. But, she didn't dare to run wantonly anymore. Instead, she sneakily stuck her head out to look around. Everyone stop. What a scandal! The old lady angrily shouted as she slammed her dragon-headed walking stick on the ground. The old man and his grandchildren were happy to be beaten. So, they were still fighting in high spirits. The one who was being beaten was shouting and yelling. It looked like a pig slaughterhouse. Xiao Yi. Come here. The old lady didn't know what to do with the old man and his grandchildren. So, she rolled her eyes and called out. What? What are you doing? My body is heavy. It's inconvenient. Dugu Xiaoyi dilly-dallied as she held her belly. She lowered her eyebrows, and looked a little guilty. It's not convenient for you to run around a while ago. Let me take a closer look. The old lady grabbed her hand, and moved it towards her belly. Dugu Xiaoyi was startled. She spread her arms, and jumped backwards. She was as nimble as a fawn. Then, she vigilantly said, Grandmother, what are you doing? This is your great-grandson. You must be careful. She hadn't finished speaking when a pop sound was heard. And, the great-grandson that Dugu Xiaoyi had mentioned fell out of her skirt. It bounced twice on the ground, and rolled unsteadily for less than 10 feet. Then, it stopped moving. It was a round pillow. And, a lively and adorable kitten was embroidered on it. It was a long ribbon. One end of the ribbon was connected to the pillow like a skipping rope. And, the other end was still hanging on Dugu Xiaoyi's waist. This thing was already very active, so when Dugu Xiaoyi loosened her grip and jumped, she immediately gave herself away. This. Dugu Xiaoyi pursed her lips, and wrung her hands. Her face was full of embarrassment. She was bashful, and couldn't say anything. Her delicate and pretty face had turned red. This matter immediately caused another round of commotion in the entire family. Old man Dugu Zongheng opened his mouth, and his fist stopped in midair. His old face had turned green and white. Dugu Wudi was sitting on the ground with his eyes wide open. His entire body was covered in dust. Dugu Cheng felt wronged as he looked at his grandfather. He then muttered, I told you that nothing had happened. I told you that nothing had happened. I wouldn't have known if something had happened. I told you, you told me that you're an idiot. You're asking for a beating. Old man Dugu Zongheng roared like a thunderclap. Dugu Cheng shrank his neck, and shut his mouth. Old man Dugu Zongheng's face twisted as he strode towards Dugu Xiaoyi. He was so angry that he started to laugh. Good. Good. Good girl. You've grown up. You can tease your grandfather now. Amazing, amazing. He nodded fiercely. He didn't know what to say. Grandfather. Grandfather, I. Dugu Xiaoyi was panic-stricken. She turned her eyes, and retreated in panic. She looked around for help. But, everyone had turned their faces to the side, and refused to help her. This little girl is out of control. She needs to be taught a lesson. What would happen if we don't teach her a lesson? This is too improper. She's the daughter of an aristocratic family. She's deceiving her family. But, she's even carrying a fake belly in front of everyone. Give her a good beating. Dugu Wudi said what everyone was thinking. Help me. Dugu Xiaoyi ran away. Old man Dugu Zongheng strode forward, and grabbed the long strip of cloth on the ground. Then, he exerted his strength, and fished Dugu Xiaoyi, as if he was fishing. Then, he pulled her back with a whooshing sound. Then, he pressed his palm on his knee, and slapped it twice. Dugu Xiaoyi struggled, and screamed as tears streamed down her face. Old man Dugu didn't feel anything when he hit his grandson. But, he felt sorry for his granddaughter after slapping her twice. So, he didn't have the heart to hit her again. Father, leave this disobedient girl to me. I'll make this girl. Dugu Wudi crawled up from the ground. He rubbed his hands, and came over with a fierce look on his face. She dared to make fun of me. She needs to be taught a good lesson. She needs to be beaten. What can you do to this girl? You bastard, get lost. Dugu Zongheng blew his beard, and shouted, Xiaoyi's body is delicate. How can you hit her? Get out of here and scram to the side. Chapter 445. Dugu Xiaoyi stood up while sobbing. She wiped her tears as if she had suffered a great injustice. The entire family looked at the pillow in the distance, and didn't make a sound. After a long time, Dugu Xiaoyi's mother looked at her mother-in-law helplessly. Mother, what should we do? The old lady Dugu angrily said, what should we do? He snorted heavily and let out a long sigh. Things have already come to this. What else can we do? Dugu Zongheng glared at her and said angrily, what else can we do? This girl came in with a big belly. I think the entire Tianxiang city knows that the Dugu family's granddaughter is pregnant with the Jun family's child. What else can we do? Damn it! Such a thing actually happened in the Dugu family. This old man is indescribably angry. It's better to let anyone take advantage of her than to let that old man Jun take advantage of her. This is truly a misfortune for our family. Father, you mean? Dugu Wudi spoke cautiously. He finally understood that the one who made the biggest mistake today was not Dugu Xiaoyi, but himself. It seemed that whatever he said was wrong. He had become a thorn in the old man's side. I only gave birth to a daughter. I didn't do anything wrong. What I mean? Bastard! What do I mean in this family now? Can my opinion represent your daughter's opinion? If I say no, then wouldn't the Dugu family stink to the heavens? Can't you use your brain a little? You, do you want to anger this old man to death? You idiot! Dugu Zongheng stomped his feet and cursed. Dugu Wudi shrunk his neck, and didn't say a word. I'll get scolded no matter what I say. I won't say anything, alright? Why aren't you saying anything? Aren't you very capable? You still dare to play silent resistance with me? You've really grown up. Old man Dugu walked back and forth in a fiendish manner. His finger was pointing at the great General Dugu's nose, and his spittle was like a torrential rain. Dugu Wudi didn't expect to stir up trouble by keeping his mouth shut. This time, he was truly speechless. Arrange for someone to go to the Jun family tomorrow to discuss this matter. They had to come to a conclusion. We must not let that brat slip away after eating his fill. All the good things in the world have been taken by that brat alone. The old lady Dugu was also very valiant as she made the final decision. If he wants to marry my granddaughter, that foppish brat will have to pass a test first. Tell him to come see me tomorrow. Tomorrow isn't too good, is it? However, the Jun family is still in troubled times. Tomorrow is a little too hasty. Dugu Wudi looked at his mother with a somewhat fearful expression. If I say tomorrow, it will be tomorrow. You have to do it no matter what. The old lady Dugu glared at him. You too, along with those 7 fools, deal with these matters in the capital. Wouldn't that be the end? It's not a big deal. It's not worth causing such a ruckus. That brat Jun Moxie has killed a lot of people in the capital today. Dugu Wudi said in a low voice. Seeing that there was no response, he praised again. That brat is really fierce. It's good that he's fierce. The old lady nodded in a gratified manner. The grandson-in-law of the old lady can't be a weakling. The rumors say that he single-handedly defeated Fortune Xian's. But, it's just a rumor. Today, I saw him slaughter a lot of people in the capital. He's truly a heroic man. As she spoke, she suddenly became angry. You disgraceful son of a b*tch. You clearly know that we're in the same boat as the Jun family, but you didn't help them. You're so heartless. What if Xiao Yi gets bullied because her family isn't strong enough? Can you bear this responsibility? Dugu Wudi was thoroughly confused. So, my mother is just as unreasonable as my father. And, I thought that my mother was a bit more reasonable, but she's already thinking about Dugu Xiaoyi's happy life after marriage. This mother's consciousness is too advanced. He watched as the group of women surrounded the old lady and Dugu Xiaoyi as they walked away. They seemed to be discussing the wedding ceremony, the matters to take note of when giving birth, and even the name of their great-grandson. Dugu Wudi and Dugu Zongheng looked at each other in dismay. They didn't know whether to laugh or cry. After a long while, old man Jun raised his leg and kicked Dugu Wudi's buttocks. "You scoundrel! Why aren't you going to help them? Why are you just standing here? Is it nice to look at?" Dugu Wudi hastily covered his head and scurried away like a rat. He secretly cursed in his heart, "Jun Moxie, you motherfucker. It's all because of you, you little scoundrel." The 7 heroes and legends rushed forward, didn't wait for their grandfather's gaze to land on them. They quickly stood up and followed behind Dugu Wudi in a majestic manner. The entire Tianxiang city was turned upside down by the people outside. However, Jun Moxie was holed up at home. He was single-mindedly preparing for old man Jun's advancement. This was a world where the strong were revered. So, it was better to increase one's strength as quickly as possible. As for those clowns outside, would they be able to run away? One must know that the monk could run away, but the temple couldn't. Jun Moxie wasn't in a hurry to take revenge. At the same time, let those people scare themselves in fear during this period of time. He first sent Guan Qinghan back to her courtyard after he returned home. Guan Qinghan suddenly called out to him as he was about to leave. Jun Moxie turned around in astonishment, and saw Guan Qinghan standing at the doorway. Her stature was frail, and her face was somewhat thin. She looked into Jun Moxie's eyes. She was somewhat afraid. She was shivering. Moreover, she had a strong desire to seek protection. Guan Qinghan suddenly turned her head away when Jun Moxie looked at her. Then, a teardrop fell to the ground. Jun Moxie's heart trembled. This woman. This beautiful woman, this peerless beauty, who knew how much she had endured? How much suffering has she gone through? How much has she sacrificed? Who has empathized with her? Perhaps in this world, where men are supreme and women are like servants' clothes, only Jun Moxie, who came from the modern era, could truly see her suffering. Only he could truly empathize with her state of mind. Only he could put himself in a woman's shoes and think for her. No one else could. Even if they could do it and think of it, it would only be how it should be. But, is it really how it should be? This woman who has always been as cold as snow and as proud as the moon is still a woman. She finally revealed her weak side. Perhaps, Guan Qinghan's previous cold and aloof attitude was because she was helpless. A young girl who was used as a tool by her family to curry favor with the rich and powerful. From then on, her life was set in stone. Knowing that her fiancé was a hero, the young girl's heart was finally comforted. But, not long after, the wedding date was set. She was only waiting to wear the red ribbon and marry into a rich and powerful family. Then, she would spend the rest of her life in peace. But, bad news came one after another. Her fiancé had died in battle at a young age. She had just suffered a huge blow. But, for the sake of her family, she married a memorial tablet. Among them, there was willingness and coercion. But wasn't that voluntary? Wasn't he forced to do it? If I stayed in the family, I would only be a tool to connect with another rich and powerful family. It would be better to come to the Jun family and live alone for the rest of my life. At least, I would be able to leave those ugly schemes. This willingness is the despair of my family and kinship. Otherwise, who would be willing to marry a dead hero and live alone for the rest of their lives? Young girls who were like flowers, like poems, like dreams, each with their own feelings, would rather marry a dead hero and live alone for the rest of their lives. But, Guan Qinghan had no other way. She was in despair. Despair of kinship, despair of her family, despair of her own life. So, she came to the Jun family. Fortunately, the Jun family had treated her well. So, they had allowed her to live in peace for the past few years. But, the Shui Han Manor incident happened at this time. Her family, which had already given up all hope, had come to force her again. Guan Qing Han is ready to die. But, the Jun family has propped up the sky for her. So, she won't regret anything for the sake of the Jun family. She won't regret anything. Therefore, she had followed the army to the southern Heaven City. She had secretly harbored the thought of sacrificing herself to protect the Jun family. She didn't sacrifice herself. But, her brother-in-law, Jun Moxie, had been drugged with an aphrodisiac. And, he was on the verge of death. And, the instigator had already escaped without a trace. I can leave at any time if I want to. But, where can I find a woman in the barracks? I can't just watch my brother-in-law burn to death if I don't look for a woman. Guan Qing Han was helpless. So, she had to save him with her own body. Some people might say that Guan Qing Han knew that Dugu Xiaoyi was infatuated with Jun Moxie. So, why didn't she call Dugu Xiaoyi back to fulfill Dugu Xiaoyi's wish? But, how could a girl like her say such a thing? Moreover, why did Dugu Xiaoyi run away? Didn't she know the consequences of drugging him? Who doesn't know what will happen after drugging him with an aphrodisiac? Dugu Xiaoyi is such a freak. But, Guan Qing Han isn't. She would only think, why did she leave if she had drugged him with an aphrodisiac? How could she come back if she had left? Guan Qing Han had no other choice when she thought about it this way. She could only use her own innocence in exchange for the Jun family's bloodline. In exchange for the continuation of her benefactor's family's bloodline. Guan Qing Han has no other choice. And, she's duty-bound to do so. It doesn't matter whether or not she has a good impression of Jun Moxie. She can't back down at this time. But, Jun Moxie has saved her life. But, she has fallen into a huge whirlpool. Will the whole world blame her? She had a relationship with her brother-in-law. No matter what the reason is, she can't escape from this blame. Personal reputation. The reputation of two families. Chastity. Chastity. All of this has made it hard for her to breathe. Guan Qing Han would have committed suicide if Jun Moxie had hesitated for even a moment. She's the bravest person in her life. She's the only one who has managed to return to Tianxiang City. It's all for the hope in her heart. Jun Moxie didn't let her down. But, she's still as weak as duckweed in the wind. Jun Moxie's heart throbbed. He took 2 steps forward. Both of them looked at each other. Jun Moxie could clearly see the helplessness and desolation in Guan Qing Han's eyes. Jun Moxie gazed at her deeply. He slowly reached out his hand and held her hand. He said gently but firmly, "Don't be afraid. I'm here." Jun Moxie's words were like a sharp sword. It pierced through the haze in the sky. Then, a ray of light appeared in the cloudy sky. This sentence is like an oath. It's like a winter thunder and a summer snow. It's like a shoulder that's as firm as a mountain. It's like a lofty mountain. It's leaning in front of Guan Qing Han's eyes. Guan Qing Han's eyes lit up. Her lips trembled, and she wanted to pull her little hand out from his warm palm. Although she doesn't want to. Jun Moxie didn't let go. Instead, he held her hand tighter. He said it again. "Don't be afraid. I'm here." Guan Qing Han didn't struggle anymore. She let him hold her hand. Her lips trembled. She didn't say anything. 2 streams of tears rolled down her cheeks. This pair of hands is so strong. So warm. Guan Qing Han's tears fell like rain. The day after tomorrow. My comrade is getting married in Beijing. We're having a get-together. Feng Ling will leave for Beijing tomorrow. Ever since he retired from the army, his comrades in arms have scattered. Some have sacrificed themselves. Some are uncontactable. It's rare for them to meet each other. This time, 7 years ago, there were 45 retired comrades in arms. 32 have gathered. 5 years ago, there were 19. After this get-together, there might not be another get-together. I received the news a month in advance. I've been suppressing it. I'm afraid my brothers will be worried. I'm also worried about whether I can last this month. I can't be delayed because of the get-together. Now, I'm done. I'm not asking for leave. I'm not asking for monthly votes. I'm just saying. Chapter 446. After leaving Guan Qinghan's place, Jun Moxie took a detour to his own courtyard to check on Yi Guhan's current condition. After all, Yi Guhan's Xian Qi was crippled, his dantian was damaged, and he had suffered from severe internal and external injuries. Now, his physique was even weaker than an ordinary person's. It was unknown if Yi Guhan suddenly had a strong will to live, but his broken body was overflowing with vitality. This made Jun Moxie very surprised. A person's state at the moment was really beyond Da Xiao's expectations. However, Yi Guhan had already fallen asleep, so Da Xiao did not disturb him. Back then, he saved him mostly because of third uncle Jun Wui's face. If not for third uncle's words that day, even if Raimu begged him, it would not matter. The true reason why Yi Guhan was saved by Da Xiao was because of his love and selfless sacrifice for the love of his heart. The next location was back to the hall. Da Xiao thought for a moment and decided to prepare to help Grandpa Jun upgrade his cultivation level. This was not because Jun Moxie was too anxious, but because Jun Moxie had always believed in one sentence: good things, especially delicious things, may not always be considered as his own once it is in his hands. There is a chance that it could be snatched away by others at any time. Only when it is completely digested can it truly be considered as his own. The peak level 9 Xian Dan had caused such a huge storm in the past, attracting experts from all over the world. Naturally, it was a good thing that could be snatched away at any time. Moreover, the Jun family seemed to be holding countless advantages at the moment. They had a great advantage, and could look down upon the entire Tianxiang. In fact, they could even look down upon the entire world. However, the young Master Jun clearly realized that the Jun family's foundation was very weak. In fact, it was far from being comparable to a genuine super family. It was just an empty shell to put up a strong front. The Jun family's greatest reliance was his virtual master. But, that extremely powerful and mysterious master didn't exist at all. In fact, the Jun family didn't have a spirit Xian expert in the truest sense of the word. Moreover, Jun Mo Xia had defeated 4 spirit Xian experts. The Jun family still needed a long period of accumulation before they could grow into a real super family. But right now, they needed a real Shen Xian master to appear in the family. Therefore, the matter of promoting the old master's cultivation level had to be put on the agenda as soon as possible. Jun Moxie led the confused Jun Zhantian and the solitary eagle into the bottom of the newly built tower. This was what Jun Moxie had specially requested when he was building it. It had to be exceptionally stable and sturdy. Moreover, the entire tower was made of granite. It was sealed tightly. Even if someone were to deliberately shout inside, they would not be heard by the people outside. His goal was to wait for this moment. Because the power fluctuations of the level 9 Xian Dan were too great. Jun Wuyi had received young Master Jun's instructions in advance, and had mobilized the most elite troops to protect the entire pagoda from all directions after these 3 men had entered the pagoda. In fact, dozens of guards had been set up both in the open and in the dark. Jun Wuyi, Song Shang, and Hai Chen-feng, the 3 Tian Xian masters, stood in 3 different directions in a triangular formation. They were on full alert, eliminating all possible interference. And the Heaven Destroyer and Spirit Devourer members, who were exclusive to June Moxie, were in charge of the innermost layer of security. Everyone was hidden in the dark with swords in their hands. The Xian beast tendon crossbows in their hands flashed with a faint cold light. There were traps everywhere. Apart from the silk string trap and the poison smoke trap, there were also 7 or 8 hidden weapons that June Moxia had used to soak in the poisonous water. As long as one took a wrong step in this dusky night, even if one was at the peak of Tian Xian or even a Xin Xian expert, they would be consigned to eternal damnation. With this kind of combat power and this kind of ambush, even if a supreme master came to look for trouble, it would be as difficult as ascending to the heavens to break through these layers of defense. In the tower. When June Moxie took out that Xian Dan, the extremely pure energy fluctuations caused Solitary Eagle to open his eyes wide. After a long while, he smacked his lips and said, "Damn it, the whole world was fighting to snatch it. I didn't even hesitate to come from the grasslands thousands of miles away. But I didn't expect this thing to stay in your hands so peacefully. It didn't even show its face. That thing we snatched, what is it?" That's a fake." June Moxie rubbed his nose and smiled without the slightest bit of embarrassment. "Actually, I felt quite embarrassed when I saw you fighting so fiercely for it that night." Solitary Eagle snorted and rolled his eyes. "Look at you smiling so slyly. Where is the slightest bit of embarrassment? Getting angry with you is a waste of my feelings. I can't be bothered. In any case, I don't really want this Xian Dan. It's more important for me to hone my unique skills and improve my own strength. It's best if you don't mind." Such an open-minded Supreme Eagle would definitely be willing to guide my grandfather to advance. June Moxie laughed. After saying half of his sentence, his expression suddenly turned solemn. He turned to Solitary Eagle and said something. "Old Eagle, I'm counting on you." These words of June Moxie could be said to be said with sincerity. After all, Grandpa June was June Moxie's first relative in this world. The advancement of his grandfather's strength was undoubtedly important. However, his grandfather's life was even more important. It didn't matter how much his grandfather's strength increased. In fact, it didn't matter if his grandfather's strength increased or not. However, his life was of utmost importance. Although Da Xiao was fully confident in this matter, June Moxie still asked for his help. It wasn't for anything else. It was to let Solitary Eagle know that I can't afford to fail in this matter. I can't afford to lose. I can only succeed. I can't afford to fail. Solitary Eagle's expression turned solemn. With a rare dignified expression, he said in a heavy tone, "Don't worry." Then, he frowned and said, "However, I won't be able to fuse this thing by myself. I will need the assistance of several special medicinal herbs." "Any one of those medicinal herbs is..." June Moxie flipped his palm. Suddenly, 3 kinds of medicinal herbs appeared in his empty palm as if he was performing a magic trick. 3 kinds of rare medicinal herbs. Heavenly star grass. Tricolored lingji. 9 Xian root. 3 kinds of special medicinal herbs needed to fuse with the Xian Dan. All of them were prepared. Furthermore, the quality of each type was much better, far surpassing the normal standard. Solitary Eagle exclaimed in surprise. He carefully examined them and said, "Kid, you're too resourceful. You even got all of these things. That being the case, there's no problem at all." June Zhantian realized that June Moxie wanted to use the 9th grade Xian Dan to forcefully upgrade his cultivation. He couldn't help but feel displeased. "Moxia, your grandfather is already old. What's the use of such a good thing? It would be a waste of such a rare treasure and a great opportunity. Not to mention, it would also consume a lot of Senior Eagle's Xian Qi. If we must do this, it would be better for you or your third uncle to take it. Wouldn't that be a great thing for our June family? It would be even more powerful. But, it would be a waste for me. Jun Moxie smiled faintly. His eyes emitted a deep emotion as he slowly said, "Grandfather's words are wrong. It's precisely because I'm old that I urgently need this thing." One had to know that everyone's age was different. As long as there weren't any accidents, an ordinary person would live between 60 to 80 years of age, while a profound practitioner's age would mostly be over 100 years old. A Sky Xian pinnacle expert would live between 150 to 200 years old. And, this is under the condition that no accidents happen and he will live a peaceful life. Jun Moxie sighed and said, "But I've been a general since I was young. I've been fighting for my whole life. I believe that I've already suffered countless injuries. My body has long been damaged, and my vitality has also been greatly damaged. Currently, I have pure Xian Qi to suppress it, so there shouldn't be too much of a problem. But, if I were to engage in a fierce battle with an expert of the same level, or a sudden illness, it's very likely that all my injuries will burst forth at the same time. But, if you take this Xian Dan, you can increase your lifespan by 100 years. Secondly, you can recuperate your body and restore it to its peak condition." Jun Moxie smiled. "As for me and the third uncle, we have other plans that are even more effective than this. You can rest assured." Jun Zhantian stroked his long beard and pondered in silence. In the end, he was still somewhat reluctant. Old people all have this mentality. They are always reluctant to use all the good things in the world. They can't wait to stuff all the good things in the world into the stomachs of their children and grandchildren. Even if they don't want a single good thing, they would still be very satisfied and happy. Jun Zhantian currently had this mentality of an old man. Seeing that the old man was still hesitating, Jun Moxie became anxious and said, "Grandfather, I'm telling you, if you really don't want to use it, I will immediately destroy this thing. Although this thing is good, it will also cause trouble. In any case, the third uncle and I will definitely not use it. Grandfather, you must know that you are now the backbone of the Jun family. Everything should be based on the overall situation." After using reason, emotion, and both carrot and stick, Grandpa Jun finally reluctantly agreed. But in the end, he repeatedly confirmed that Jun Moxie and Jun Wui really have other methods. Only then did he feel relieved. Jun Moxie couldn't say too much in front of the solitary eagle. There were some things that he really couldn't say. But it really took him a lot of brainpower to deal with the old man's probing. He was so anxious that his back was drenched in sweat, for the evil monarch, who wouldn't even blink even if he slaughtered everyone in the world. This was an unbelievable thing. Fearing that a long delay would bring trouble, the moment Grandpa Jun agreed, the evil monarch Jun Dashao hurriedly crushed the heavenly star grass. With a flash of red light, the pure medicinal properties of the heavenly star grass had already been pasted on the surface of the level 9 Xian Dan. In a split second, the surging power of the Xian Dan suddenly stagnated. In the blink of an eye, it was completely restrained. The pure and restless energy fluctuated, as if it had suddenly become the most obedient baby. Jun Moxie didn't have the time to sigh. He gave Solitary Eagle a look. Solitary Eagle understood tacitly and stepped behind Jun Zhantian. He placed his palms on the top of Jun Zhantian's head and the other on the back of Jun Zhantian's head. At the same time, Jun Zhantian sat down cross-legged with his eyes slightly closed. His appearance was solemn. The unique bitter fragrance of the tricolored Ganoderma permeated the air. Jun Moxie's art of unlocking heaven's fortune had already infused the medicinal properties of the tricolored Ganoderma into the Xian Dan. Not a single bit of it was wasted. Suddenly, the Xian Dan became as bright as a small sun in the dark night. It shone so brightly that the inside of the pagoda could be seen. The three of them felt a sharp pain in their eyes that they couldn't look at. A halo of light suddenly lit up. Under the glaring light, there was a kind of gentleness that made people feel at ease. Jun Moxie didn't neglect it. He shouted loudly and operated the art of unlocking heaven's fortune with all his might. The Xian Dan's radiance once again flashed violently. A bright yellow stream of water suddenly shot out from the Xian Dan. It shot right into Jun Zhan Tian's mouth. At the same time, the last remaining elixir in Jun Moxie's hand, the 9 Xian root, transformed into a stream of water of the same thickness. It flashed in the air, and also entered Jun Zhan Tian's mouth. Not one bit earlier, not one bit later. Meanwhile, Solitary Eagle's supreme level strength was also fully activated. It continuously fused into Jun Zhan Tian's meridians. Jun Moxie finally heaved a sigh of relief. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. In fact, it could be said that he had already succeeded halfway. Whether it was the heavenly star grass or the tricolored Ganoderma, Jun Moxie had selected the best of them. As for the 9 Xian root, he had used the most essential part of it. With the harmonization of these 3 elixirs in addition to Solitary Eagle's supreme level strength, there was no doubt that his grandfather would advance. At this time, Jun Moxie finally remembered to use his divine sense to check the surrounding movements. This was the most critical time. A slight disturbance could destroy a supreme-level expert and a Xin Xian who was on the verge of advancing. He couldn't be the slightest bit careless. To be honest, Solitary Eagle's willingness to agree so readily had somewhat exceeded Jun Moxie's expectations. With Solitary Eagle's experience, how could he not understand the degree of danger of this matter? It wasn't an advancement, but a disturbance. At the most critical juncture, even a cry from a 3-year-old child could directly lead to the invasion of the demons in their hearts, and cause them to go berserk. Jun Moxie had originally thought that he would have to waste a lot of words, or that he would have to pay some kind of conditions. But now, it seemed that he had somewhat gauged the heart of a gentleman with his own mean measure. After getting along for a long time, there would always be feelings. Even supreme-level experts were no exception. It was very quiet outside. There wasn't a trace of movement. Jun Moxie heaved a sigh of relief. Finally, there was no danger. At this time, Jun Moxie felt that he seemed to have forgotten something. But after thinking about it carefully, he really couldn't recall it. He couldn't help but concentrate and quietly guard his mind, hoping to find out whether he had forgotten or overlooked something. On the other side, a thick layer of white fog rose from Jun Zhan Tian's body, and slowly enveloped Solitary Eagle within it. Jun Moxie looked at this thick white fog, and couldn't help but think of the pure spiritual qi in the Hongjun Pagoda. Then, he thought of the strange white fog in the Tian Fa forest, and he sighed in his heart. The world is really big, and there are really all kinds of strange things. Suddenly, a light flashed in his mind, and Dashao's heart thumped as he thought of what he had forgotten. Mei Xuyan, Mei Qian. These 2 women had followed him from Tian Fa all the way here. When he entered the city today, he clearly saw them sitting in the carriage with Guan Qinghan. But now, how did they mysteriously disappear? When did they get off the carriage? And when did he disappear? Jun Moxie suddenly took a deep breath, and frowned. It was very chaotic at that time, but he had always been used to dealing with chaotic situations. Needless to say, the carriage was right behind him. Logically speaking, it shouldn't have been able to hide when they got off the carriage. But, he didn't see when they disappeared. Moreover, the appearance of such a fairy-like beauty was bound to cause a considerable commotion. But, Jun Moxie recalled the situation at that time, and realized that no one's eyes had revealed a look of amazement. In other words, no one had seen them get off the carriage. But, how did they disappear? He had used at least a dozen methods to probe these 2 women along the way, but he hadn't found anything unusual. Could it be that these 2 women were so brilliant that even I couldn't see through them? What kind of strength does it take to escape from under my nose without making a sound? How terrifying would that be? Looking at the appearance of these 2 women, even if they were older than me, they couldn't be that much older. Could it be that they are super experts who have surpassed the great masters? How nonsensical would that be? But, how would I explain the current situation if they weren't? Jun Moxie knitted his brows, and a huge alarm bell rang in his heart. From their first encounter to their arrival in Tianxiang, all their interactions along the way had been carefully replayed in Jun Moxie's mind. He had deduced everything little by little from the two women's tiny movements and subtle expressions. Jun Moxie had finally discovered two suspicious points. The first one was that the green-clothed girl's appearance seemed to have changed a little during this month-long journey. It was only a change in the thickness of her eyebrows. But Jun Moxie had still discovered it when he had calmed down at that moment. The green-clothed girl had changed her appearance before. This was confirmed without a doubt. But why did she change her appearance? I'm part of the army, and I don't have much interaction with this kind of girl. Could it be that they're afraid of being recognized? In other words, I've seen her before. So, who is she? That white-clothed girl, Mei Shuyan, shouldn't have changed her appearance. This is very obvious. Moreover, her prejudice against me is also very obvious. In fact, she has often caused trouble for me along the way. This is also worth considering. Could it be that I've offended her before? But she didn't change her appearance. So, I haven't seen her before. So, how should I say that I've offended her? Moreover, I wouldn't have forgotten such a peerless beauty if I had seen her before. Moreover, they had confronted the Silver Blizzard City when we had first met. Jun Moxie let out a long sigh. These two women are definitely not ordinary people. But Jun Moxie still couldn't figure out who these two women were even though he had thought about it carefully. The green-clothed girl and the Qian Sun Serpent Queen must have some kind of relationship. Otherwise, how could there be such a coincidence when I've been constantly harassed by poisonous snakes? Even if they're not the Snake King, they must be sisters. There's no mistake about this. But who is the white-clothed girl? Mei Shuyan. I've never heard of her before. Could it be that she's related to Lady Yu Er from the Spirit Fog Lake's Enai Chang Pavilion? At this moment, Jun Moxie suddenly had an inexplicable thought. I'm afraid that I'll have countless entanglements with these two women in my life. Or maybe it'll be troublesome, as for his luck with women. Although Jun Moxie felt that he was quite handsome, he wasn't narcissistic enough to think that any woman would fall in love with him the moment they see him. It's so complicated, but I can't find the slightest clue. This is really troublesome. Jun Moxie let out a long sigh. Why are you sighing? A voice sounded. Jun Moxie opened his eyes and saw Jun Zhantian standing in front of him, looking at him with concern. Jun Moxie was delighted and asked, "Grandfather, how do you feel? Did you successfully break through?" Break through? Did you successfully break through? Grandpa Jun blew his beard and laughed heartily. This is a huge breakthrough. I never dreamed that I could reach such heights in this life. Indeed. Grandpa Jun's progress this time is simply unbelievable. Solitary Eagle said in a strange tone of extreme exhaustion. There was a faint trace of envy in his tone, as well as jealousy. At the final stage, your grandfather nearly sucked me dry. Supreme Solitary Eagle smiled bitterly. Coupled with the power of the Xian Dan and the power of the elixirs, this huge progress is rarely seen since ancient times. In just a few hours. Solitary Eagle smiled bitterly and said, this result makes this old man feel that I'm a fool who only knows how to practice martial arts for the rest of my life. Could it be that the progress is huge? Jun Moxie was ecstatic. It's more than just huge. Grandpa Jun was very happy. He smiled happily and said, before the breakthrough, this old man was at the peak of Tianxian and was on the verge of breaking through. The moment the elixirs entered my body, the Xian Dan entered my body and Supreme Solitary Eagle activated his Xian Qi, I successfully broke through to the first level of Xin Xian. After that, your grandfather absorbed the power of the Xian Dan and forcefully broke through the barrier, reaching the second level of Xin Xian. Solitary Eagle sighed in disappointment, but it wasn't over yet. The effect of the Xian Dan had slowed down a little. But, the power of the 3 elixirs had fiercely stimulated the Xian Dan to move forward. It surged forward little by little, and rampaged through my meridians. I nearly died from exhaustion. It was with great difficulty that I managed to protect Grandpa Jun's meridians. But, this old man suddenly realized that your grandfather's luck was extremely good. He was lucky enough to break through the 3rd level of Xinxian. And, that's why he stopped. In other words, my grandfather is now at the 3rd level of Xinxian. He's only 1 level below that of Xiaobuyu. Jun Moxie became excited. He clapped his hands and chuckled, it's almost as I expected. I thought that I could reach the 2nd level of Xinxian. But, I've unexpectedly advanced by 1 level. What advanced by 1 level? Xinxian is at the beginning of the 2nd level. Then, he's at the middle level. Then, he's at the beginning of the 3rd level. Your grandfather is now at the 3rd level of Xinxian. Damn it! I'm so lucky. Solitary Eagle panted with rage as he flung his sleeves. He felt very unbalanced. I'm going to sleep. You two can stay here foolishly. I won't accompany you anymore. Jun Zhantian laughed heartily. He cupped his hands and bowed, many thanks for your help, Supreme Solitary Eagle. This Jun is very grateful. The entire Jun family is very grateful. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.